Chapter 301. The three of them flew higher and higher in the fog. Lord Taoist Huayan waved his sleeves to block an immortal aura and asked Qin Shi with a frown, "Shoujing, are you sure? Why is it in the sky? Is it flying?" "It should be," Qin Shi said. "I also think it's strange. The position hasn't changed. It seems to be in the sky." As they were talking, Lord Taoist Jingha's divine sense found something. He said, "There's a mountain there." Qin Shi and Lord Taoist Huayan immediately understood. Qin Shi asked, "Master, is there anyone in the mountain?" Lord Taoist Jingha shook his head. "There are too many things in the mountain. My divine sense can't explore in detail in this fog." Although the divine sense of a nascent soul cultivator was much stronger and wouldn't easily get lost in this fog, the fog was so strange that divine sense couldn't play its original role. Qin Shi understood this but didn't say much. He just sighed. On second thought, he already knew where Mo Tiange was. What was there to be afraid of? Therefore he restrained himself and followed the two nascent soul Taoists. The lonely mountain finally appeared in their sight. Because of the fog, they could only see its rough outline. As soon as they approached the lonely mountain, Lord Taoist Jingha and Lord Taoist Huayan looked at each other and frowned. Lord Taoist Jingha whispered, Something's wrong. There are two people." Qin Shi didn't understand what he meant. He was happy and asked, "Master, did you feel it?" "Yes." Lord Taoist Jingha said absent-mindedly, "It's a bit strange." "What's strange?" Lord Taoist Jingha didn't answer this question. He shook his sleeves, and the flying magic tool suddenly sped up and flew to the top of the lonely mountain. Lord Taoist Huayan followed him without saying a word. The three of them flew close and hovered over the mountain. The top of the mountain was covered with spiritual herbs with pink ball-like flowers, swaying in the wind and exuding an intoxicating smell. Qin Shi looked down and saw soybean-sized beans under the spiritual herbs. They were densely stacked layer after layer and covered the whole mountain. The rocks were long gone. Heavenly aromatic beans. Until now, he felt an inexplicable panic in his heart. It seemed that something had happened without him knowing. When Lord Taoist Jingha and Lord Taoist Huayan saw the heavenly aromatic grasses all over the mountain, their expressions changed. But they didn't say anything. How could they say something like that before they were certain? Two people? If it was really Master Song Feng who brought Mo Tiange here, his intentions were truly damned. In silence, the three of them descended to the peak. The flat mountaintop gradually became clear in the eyes of the three. Amidst the heavenly aromatic grass, the pink flower balls and the green vines that filled the sky, a blue and white color appeared. Upon closer inspection, it turned out to be a robe. Qin Shi subconsciously held his breath. In an instant, his heart was seized by panic. Blue robes, white coats, cloak. These were the clothes of Shenqing School's female disciples, but there was also a man's cyan sword robe. This was Gujin sect's uniform. Finally, there were two people submerged in the heavenly aromatic grass. Even though they were not hugging each other, even though there was a distance between them, the chaotic scene and their messy clothes were enough to explain what had happened. For a split second, Qin Shi felt that there was nothing in his mind. He had never imagined that he would see such a scene. What had happened? Why was this happening? He wanted to calm down, but he couldn't calm down. As soon as his feet touched the ground, he staggered forward. Lord Taoist Jingha called from behind but didn't stop him. Finally he ran up to her. Under the pink flower balls of the heavenly aromatic grass was the familiar face he used to yearn for day and night. At this moment, her eyes were closed tightly and she was unconscious. He opened his mouth but couldn't make a sound. He suddenly began to hate himself. Why didn't I keep an eye on her at that time? Why did I let her get lost and encounter such a terrible thing? If I could have been more careful, if they could have found her earlier. But now, all he could do was reach out his trembling hands, pick her up and hold her tightly in his arms. But even so, what happened couldn't be erased. Lord Taoist Jingha caught up and sighed when he saw this scene. Calm down. Qin Shi didn't answer as if he hadn't heard anything. Lord Taoist Huayan walked closer, glanced around and fixed his eyes on another unconscious person. He snorted coldly. Gujin sect. Who is this? How dare you? Lord Taoist Jingha wasn't a kind person. Seeing this scene, he was already burning with anger, but he managed to suppress it because Qin Shi's reaction wasn't right. When he heard Lord Taoist Huayan's words, he waved his sleeve, and a spiritual aura shot out, hitting Jing Xingji's body firmly. Jing Xingji groaned, spat out a mouthful of blood and passed out again. Lord Taoist Jingha turned around and called out. Qin Shi didn't move. He just held Mo Tiange motionlessly. Lord Daoist Jinghe frowned, stepped forward and put his hand on Qin Shi's shoulder. Wake up. After a long time, Qin Shi's eyes finally moved, and he found that there were tears in his eyes. He wiped them away, took a deep breath and tried to suppress his emotions. Master, I'm fine. Because of what happened, he couldn't let anything happen to him. Seeing that Qin Shi came back to his senses, Lord Daoist Jinghe breathed a sigh of relief and said gently, It's good that you understand. Don't worry. Tiange is fine. It should be because of the drug. She'll wake up in a while. Qin Shi lowered his head and answered, carefully pulling Mo Tiange's clothes. During this process he didn't look at Jing Xingji next to him. Lord Daoist Jinghe paused and asked tentatively, What are you going to do? If you want to kill this boy, I'll do it now. A murderous aura flashed in Qin Shi's eyes, but he suppressed it in the end. No need. I still have something to ask him. If I want to kill him, I'll do it myself. All right. Lord Daoist Jinghe was silent for a while. He looked at Mo Tiange, and a meaningful light flashed in his eyes. He asked slowly, What do you think, after this happened? Qin Shi sat blankly for a while and seemed to hear what Lord Daoist Jinghe said. He held the unconscious Mo Tiange in his arms and said faintly, Master, what do you want to hear? Lord Daoist Jinghe couldn't say it for a while, so he thought about it and changed his words. You don't care? Qin Shi clenched his fists as if he was trying his best to suppress himself. But after a while he still couldn't suppress himself, so he suddenly slapped his palm down. His spiritual aura was turbulent, tearing all the heavenly aromatic grasses around him to pieces. How could I not care? He said through clenched teeth, glaring fiercely at Jing Xingji not far from him. I wish I could kill him and tear him into pieces. I want to grind Master Song Feng's bones into ashes even more. But doing that will only let me vent my hatred. Things have already happened. If Tiange wakes up, she'll definitely be the one suffering the most. So you don't mind? Qin Shi didn't answer this question. He closed his eyes and shook his head. Master, don't ask me. My mind is in a mess right now. Chapter 302. Qin Shi never thought such a thing would happen one day. From the day Yi Hai entrusted his daughter to him more than 80 years ago, Mo Tiange's safety was his responsibility. When he returned from Demonic Mountain injured, he sent Yi Jingwen to the secular world to pick up the little girl. Unfortunately, her uncle Yi Jiang chose to escape with her. At that time he thought it was the Yi family's own choice. In that case he didn't violate his oath, so he didn't need to worry about it. Therefore during those 10 years he never looked for the whereabouts of the uncle and nephew. Later, when he met her in Yunwu sect and discovered that she was the little girl from back then, he thought he still couldn't escape this responsibility. Since he met her again for Yi Hai's sake, he had to protect her in the future. Then he would take her back to Xianqing school and let his master accept her as his disciple. He would watch her grow up step by step and he would be moved little by little. The current Mo Tiange was no longer the little girl from back then. She was already a core formation cultivator and had grown to the point where she had the strength to protect herself. He also thought he could finally change his identity from her protector to her lover. But he never expected that the reality would be so cruel. He just wanted to change his identity, and she, who he had protected for so many years, was hurt like this. Why did this happen? He didn't need to think too much to guess the reason. Master Song Feng hated him and his master. He happened to meet Mo Tiange alone, so he retaliated on her. If it weren't for them, Master Song Feng wouldn't even look at a little core formation cultivator, let alone come up with such a sinister idea. For so many years, he always thought he was her protector, but he didn't expect that the pure Yin constitution he worried about didn't bring disaster to her. In the end she suffered this kind of thing because of him. Boy, you don't have to blame yourself. Hearing his master's voice, he smiled sadly and said softly, Rest assured, master. I know what to do. Shoujing, you really don't have to blame yourself, Lord Daoist Huayan said with a faint smile. Qingwei's primordial Yin is still there, which means the thing you worried about didn't happen. Qin Shi suddenly looked up at Lord Daoist Huayan and then at his master. The two nascent soul Lord Daoists both had smiles on their faces which didn't seem fake. Master? He cast a pleading gaze towards Lord Daoist Jinghe. Martial Uncle Huayan. Is what he said true? Lord Daoist Jinghe smiled. Of course it's true. Otherwise I would have already killed this brat. Why would I still ask you? That's right. With Master's violent personality, if something like this had happened to his disciple, even if Jing Xingji had been tricked, he would definitely kill him to vent his anger. How could he still be so calm? He was the one who became excited when he saw the scene in front of him, so he naturally thought. Tinga was in the same realm as him now. He couldn't see whether her primordial Yin was still there or not, but his master and martial uncle Huayan could. Realizing this, Qin was ecstatic for a moment, then angry for a moment. He shouted, "Master, did you do this on purpose?" Lord Daoist Jinghe burst into laughter and said complacently, "Brat, no matter how smart you are, you're still a layman when it comes to this kind of thing. Master can tell at a glance." Qin wanted to get angry, but after experiencing the misunderstanding just now and learning the truth, he only felt incomparably happy. Even though he was ridiculed by Lord Daoist Jinghe, he couldn't make an angry expression, so his face twisted. On the side, Lord Daoist Huayan stroked his beard with a smile. He also thought it was very interesting. However, he was more like a senior than Lord Daoist Jinghe. After laughing for a while, he said, "Senior Martial Brother Jinghe, since Qingwei has been found and is fine, we should go to Jade Palace to meet them." "All right." Lord Daoist Jinghe stopped laughing and said to Qin seriously, Jade Palace is too dangerous, so it's not convenient for me to take you there. Since Qingge is fine, I'll leave the rest to you." Qin knew the trip to Jade Palace was very important to his master. His master had been stuck in the peak of the middle stage of the nascent soul realm for many years and hadn't had a chance to advance. He came to Demonic Mountain this time because there were precious treasures in Jade Palace in Immortal's ruins. "Master, don't worry. When Qingge wakes up, we'll go find her father's remains and go back. We won't stay here for long. It's good that you know what to do. This time, the restrictions on Demonic Mountain are unstable, so it's not good to stay here for long." Lord Daoist Jinghe paused, took out several things from his robe and handed them to him. "There's not much time and Qingge hasn't woken up yet, so I won't take you out. I've marked the path just now. Just follow the compass and you won't get lost again." "Yes, master." Qin took these things and put them away without any nonsense. In addition to the compass, there were several magic weapons and talismans, all of which were his master's treasures. He just used his blood essence to protect himself. After thinking for a while, he asked again, "Master, is Master Song Feng also going to Jade Palace?" Lord Daoist Jinghe's face darkened. "Most likely. What else can catch his eye except Jade Palace?" He sneered. "Qingge is fine, but this is definitely his plot. If I meet him again, I'll have to settle accounts with him." Senior Martial Brother Jinghe. Lord Daoist Huayan frowned worriedly. "Master Song Feng is indeed powerful. I'm afraid the two of us are no match for him, right?" "What are you afraid of?" Lord Daoist Jinghe said faintly, "We're not the only ones who want to deal with him. There'll always be an opportunity." Lord Daoist Huayan was speechless. He thought for a while and nodded with a sigh. He had a grudge against Master Song Feng. Even if this didn't happen, he would still fight with him. What was there to be afraid of? "Master, it's dangerous on Demonic Mountain. You and Martial Uncle Huayan should protect yourselves first. As for Master Song Feng, Qin face was full of killing intent. "After this trip, I'll advance to the nascent soul realm, and I'll deal with him sooner or later." "Good." Lord Daoist Jinghe patted him on the shoulder and laughed. "You're ambitious. You're indeed my disciple." "I'm not as strong as him, but all my disciples are better than him." Qin smiled. "Master, you and Martial Uncle Huayan should go quickly. It'll be too late if you don't go now." "And?" Lord Daoist Jinghe rolled his eyes, glanced at Jing Xingji, who was seriously injured by him, and asked, "What about this boy? What are you going to do?" Qin glanced at Jing Xingji, who vomited blood after being beaten by Lord Daoist Jinghe, and said faintly, "There are some things I have to ask him." "All right." Lord Daoist Jinghe knew he had an idea, so he didn't care anymore. In the end he said, "Go out as soon as possible. Don't stay too long." Qin nodded and watched him and Lord Daoist Huayan take out their flying magic weapons and leave together. When the figures of the two nascent soul Lord Daoists disappeared, Qin looked at the scene in front of him and couldn't help but feel angry. Although it didn't really happen, the scene in front of him showed that Jing Xingji definitely took advantage of Qingge. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but want to hit Jing Xingji. But Jing Xingji had some friendship with him, and he needed an explanation from him, so he could only endure it for now. He looked down at Qingge. She was still unconscious. He felt her pulse and checked her condition. Indeed, as Master said, she wasn't injured. It was probably because of the drug that she hadn't woken up yet. He thought for a moment, picked up Qingge's clothes and put them on her. Only now did he understand Lord Daoist Jinghe's meaning. Qingge's outer clothes weren't there, but her underwear was still intact. Obviously she wasn't violated. Sure enough, Master had sharp eyes and found the key point at a glance. As for Qin Shi, he lost his sense of propriety as soon as he saw the scene in front of him. But this was too strange. If Master Song Feng was determined to make Tiange lose her chastity, why did he leave her and Jing Xingji here? There were heavenly aromatic grasses everywhere. If the two of them were really affected, why did the two of them pass out here in the end? Did an accident happen or were they stopped by others? Of course, it was also possible that everything was wrong. After all, Master Song Feng's involvement was just their guess. Just as he thought up to this point, he heard a groan. He looked up and saw Jing Xingji moving his hands and feet. He woke up. Jing Xingji felt his head hurt and his chest hurt even more. He knew he was injured, but he didn't know what happened. He closed his eyes and gasped for breath for a while. When he felt his breathing was a bit smoother, he opened his eyes with difficulty. The moment he opened his eyes, he was startled. Qin Shi was sitting not far away, holding Mo Tiange and staring at him coldly with cold eyes. Although Qin Shi had never been friendly to him, his gaze carried a hint of anger. Then he realized something was wrong with his body, so he lowered his head and scared himself again. He was actually half naked. This. Jing Xingji opened his mouth and found his voice was extremely hoarse. He gulped, then asked, "What happened?" Qin Shi sneered. "Don't you remember?" His tone made Jing Xingji frown. He looked at his half-naked appearance, then looked at Qin Shi's posture of protecting Mo Tiange. Suddenly, some memories flashed in his mind and he was greatly shocked. Seeing that Jing Xingji seemed to remember something, the anger in Qin Shi's heart intensified. He stared at Jing Xingji coldly but didn't say a word. Under his gaze, Jing Xingji wanted to defend himself, but he felt he had nothing to say. Say he had no choice? Things had already happened, and he already knew what this junior martial sister meant to Qin Shoujing. What was the point of saying this? After a long time he said, "If you want to kill me, I have nothing to say." "So, you also think you deserve to die?" "Of course not." Jing Xingji looked up and said, "I don't think I did anything wrong. I didn't want to do this. Although I like beauties, I'm not interested in other people's women. However, things have already happened and I don't want to shirk any responsibility. If you want to kill me to vent your anger, I have nothing to say. Of course I will not fight back." After a moment of silence, Qin Shi said, "You didn't want to?" "Yes, we ran into Master Song Feng. He hated you and your master, so he vented his anger on your junior martial sister. He brought us here and fed us heavenly aromatic beans, so..." What Jing Xingji said was consistent with their guesses. However, from what he said, it seemed that he didn't know what happened in the end. What was going on? Qin Shi was confused. Chapter 303. After a long silence, "What do you remember?" Qin Shi's question startled Jing Xingji. Remember what? He remembered being restrained by Master Song Feng, brought here, forced to eat heavenly aromatic beans, and seeing Mo Qingwei in a daze. At first, he was still rational and tried his best to restrain himself, but before he could think of a way, the drug took effect. He only thought it was a woman, so he tried to pull her clothes. Unexpectedly, she was still rational and resisted. Then, he felt a headache and lost consciousness. Right? Jing Xingji suddenly jumped up, looked down at his body and breathed a sigh of relief. Although he was half naked, his lower body was intact. He was scared by his own memory just now, but it seemed he didn't do anything. Although he wasn't Qin Shoujing's best friend, he really felt uncomfortable sleeping with his woman. Fortunately, that didn't happen. Thinking of this, a thought flashed in Jing Xingji's mind and he asked, "You knew? Nothing happened between us." Qin Shi showed a faint smile, feeling relieved. Since Jing Xingji said so, it seemed nothing really happened. If something happened to Mo Tiange, he wouldn't mind, but it would be very cruel for both him and Mo Tiange. "Are you sure nothing happened?" he asked again. When Jing Xingji saw his expression, he let out a sigh of relief. He took out a healing medicinal pill and swallowed it. When his injuries recovered a little, he went to pick up his clothes and said impatiently, "I've suffered a great loss. I've lost so much face, but all I did was strip your woman's clothes." Hearing this, Qin Shi's face darkened and he said coldly, "You still dare to say that?" Not to mention stripping her clothes, he was furious even if he was hit once. If this person wasn't Jing Xingji, he would beat him up to vent his anger even if he didn't kill him. Qin Shi took a deep breath and swallowed his anger. He then asked slowly, "What happened in the end? Since Master Song Feng deliberately retaliated against us, why are you all fine?" Jing Xingji put on his clothes and carefully recalled everything he remembered. In the end he said, "I felt like someone knocked me out." "Someone?" Qin was puzzled. Who else would come here? This kind of lonely peak was extremely high and it was also shrouded in fog. Unless it was intentional, who would come up here? If someone came here casually, Master Song Feng wouldn't have chosen such a place. Jing Xingji thought for a while, then shook his head. Your junior sister seems to be better than me. Ask her when she wakes up. Maybe she knows. Qin answered, but he continued to stare at him without saying anything. Jing Xingji felt a chill run down his spine. I've already said that I haven't touched her. You're not thinking of killing me to vent your anger, are you? Qin, she said coldly, you didn't touch her, but you were the one who took off her clothes, right? You can't blame me for this. Jing Xingji said confidently. Don't tell me you're going to argue about this too? I didn't even get to kiss her. Jing Xingji's words made Qin feel a bit better. He looked at Mo Chenga in his arms, paused for a while, then said, I don't want to kill you to vent my anger, but I also don't want her to see you again. You should leave first. Jing Xingji sighed and said, I know you've already shown mercy to me and I'm not an ungrateful person. Since that's the case, let's meet again. He no longer nagged. He stood up, picked up his things, rode his flying sword and flew away. Fortunately, Master Song Feng probably didn't care about the two core formation cultivators' things, so he didn't pick up their Chengkuan bags. Otherwise it would really be a big loss. The two of them weren't ordinary core formation cultivators, and the treasures they had on them couldn't be compared to ordinary core formation cultivators. Jing Xingji walked far away and Qin withdrew his gaze. The matter was temporarily resolved, but it was far from over. Even if this kind of thing didn't happen in the end, it would still hurt Mo Tiange. Now he only hoped that Mo Tiange's state of mind wasn't affected. In addition, Master Song Feng's move was really sinister. If it really happened, even if he caught Mo Tiange and killed her, it still wouldn't be as disgusting as this move. Master always said this person was the #1 cultivator in the celestial pole, but in fact he was neither human nor ghost. He was psychopathic and wasn't a normal person since a long time ago. Sure enough, he was right. After an unknown amount of time, Mo Tiange woke up from the darkness. After regaining consciousness, the first thing she felt was a headache. A splitting headache. You're awake. A gentle voice came into her ears. It was Qin, senior martial brother. She called out and reached out her hand. Just as she was about to say something, some scene suddenly flashed in her mind. Her eyes widened and she jumped up in fright. When she opened her eyes, the person she saw was indeed Qin. Seeing her panicked look, Qin comforted her with gentle words. Don't be afraid. It's okay now. You're safe now. His gentleness calmed Mo Tiange down a little, but when she recalled what happened before she fainted, she couldn't stay calm. She grabbed Qin's clothes, raised her head and asked in panic, Senior martial brother, did I? No. Qin knew what she wanted to ask, so he hugged her without hesitation. Nothing happened. Don't be afraid. I'm here. You'll be fine. No. Mo Tiange shook her head in despair. You don't know what happened. Master Song Feng Jing Xingji. She was almost incoherent. I know. Qin hugged her tightly and comforted her. I know what you're saying. Don't be afraid. It's really okay. You're fine. Nothing happened. Feel it, isn't it? Such comforting and hugging comforted Mo Tiange. She listened to him and felt that her clothes were intact and there was nothing wrong with her body. Then she slowly calmed down and muttered to herself, No, nothing happened. Nothing. Yes, nothing. Nothing happened. Qin patted her back and repeated softly. Mo Tiange's mood gradually eased from his gentle voice. She leaned on his shoulder and tried to calm down. After a long time, she finally felt that everything was true. Nothing terrible really happened to her. She finally returned to normal and asked, Senior martial brother, how did you find this place? I thought you and Master couldn't find me. When she was brought here by Master Song Feng and fed with heavenly aromatic beans, her heart was full of despair. She fervently hoped that Master and him would come to save her, but even when she lost her mind, they still didn't come. Feeling her trembling, Qin hugged her tighter and hated Master Song Feng even more in his heart. Mo Tiange had always been very courageous, but this time she was so scared. It could be imagined how frightened and desperate she was at that time. It was Master who thought of a way. He didn't mention that he used his blood essence and only said, We found this place. Fortunately, you're fine. Did you guys save me in time? No. When we arrived, you and Jing Xingji were already unconscious. Seeing that her mood had returned to normal, Qin told her in detail what he saw when he arrived. He especially explained that only her outer clothes were torn, but her undergarments were intact and there was a distance between her and Jing Xingji's. Mo Chenga listened to him one by one, lost in thought. When Qin Shi finished, she asked, "Did you see anyone else besides us?" No. This question puzzled Qin Shi. He said, "Jing Xingji said someone seemed to have knocked him out. Do you still remember?" Mo Chenga slowly recalled. At that time Nie Wuxiang showed mercy to her. She didn't actually swallow those heavenly aromatic beans, but some juice flowed into her body so she was affected. After feeding them heavenly aromatic beans, Master Song Feng laughed and walked away. She wanted to save them by herself, but she finally spat out all the heavenly aromatic beans in her mouth. She didn't know what Master Song Feng did to her body, but her cultivation level was restricted and her mind was also affected. She was in a daze and couldn't use her strength. Then Jing Xingji pounced on her and tore her clothes. She resisted desperately, but when she thought she couldn't escape, her strength suddenly disappeared. She couldn't hold on anymore and passed out. Right. She suddenly remembered that before she passed out, she seemed to have heard a sigh. That voice was a bit familiar. She grabbed Qin Shi's clothes and said, "It's Nie Wuxiang. She saved me." Nie Wuxiang? Who was she? Nie Wuxiang is Master Song Feng's disciple. We met her before and she was also the one who led Master Song Feng here. Thinking of Nie Wuxiang, Mo Chenga didn't know whether she should hate her or be grateful. Master Song Feng was led here by her, but in the end she was able to survive because she extended a helping hand. Qin Shi listened to her slowly talk about what happened after the two of them were separated, as well as some things she still remembered. In the end she said, "It should be Nie Wuxiang." She came back later and knocked Jing Xingji unconscious. I recognize her voice. Qin Shi was silent for a moment then said, "Fortunately, Master Song Feng really deserved it. If he didn't treat his disciple like that, how could this Miss Nie take the risk to save you? In my opinion, when you escaped from the fog with her, she reported it to her master. I just didn't expect Master Song Feng to come up with such a shameless idea." He paused for a moment then continued, "Even if she also had a part in this matter, she saved you after all. If we meet her in the future, we should be lenient." Mo Chenga nodded then sighed. She's also a pitiful person. Master Song Feng didn't treat her like a disciple. Even if she was a servant, he wouldn't treat her like this. Qin Shi smiled then bent down and hugged her tightly. "I'm just glad that you're really okay." After the disaster, this kind of hug made Mo Chenga feel very satisfied. The two of them hugged for a while, then she suddenly asked, "Senior Marshal Brother, if this kind of thing really happened, what would you do?" Qin Shi didn't let go of her, so Mo Chenga couldn't see his expression. After a while, she only heard him say, "Of course I'd tear Master Song Feng into pieces." This wasn't the answer Mo Chenga wanted to hear, so she asked again, "What about me? Would you still want me?" This time, Qin Shi didn't answer for a long time. It was so long that Mo Chenga felt disappointed. Then she heard him chuckle and let go of her. He looked her in the eyes and said with incomparable sincerity, "No matter what you look like or what happened to you, you're Mo Chenga. I love you, so I absolutely won't abandon you." This was the first time he said he loved her. Although none of these things happened, although it was just a promise, Mo Chenga felt she was still willing to believe him and believe he didn't lie. Chapter 304. The most dangerous place on Demonic Mountain was Immortal's Ruins, and the most mysterious place in Immortal's Ruins was Jade Palace. The two of them talked about their feelings after they parted. When Mo Chenga heard Lord Daoist Jinghe went to Jade Palace, she asked about it. Qin Shi said, "Jade Palace is said to be the immortal residence where immortals rested during the Great War between immortals and demons, so the fallen immortals were buried nearby, forming Immortal's Ruins. There are many relics left by immortals in Jade Palace. Although most of them are damaged and some of them are too dense for cultivators like us to use, there are also some strange things. If you get them, it'll be a great fated chance." Mo Chenga knew a little about this, but it seemed a bit unusual this time. Aside from Jade Palace, there are also many treasures in other places on Demonic Mountain, right? Why did all the nascent soul cultivators go to Jade Palace this time? Qin Shi said with a smile, "Naturally, they got some news that there are rare treasures in Jade Palace." At this point, a trace of doubt appeared in his eyes and he said with uncertainty, "Master told me that a treasure appeared in the Jade Palace last time. 4 nascent soul cultivators like them, it might be able to break through in one go, so this time many nascent soul cultivators want to go to the Jade Palace to try their luck." It's actually such a treasure? Mo Chenga was very surprised. The higher one's cultivation level was, the fewer treasures that could advance one's cultivation level, so most nascent soul cultivators were stuck in the early stage of nascent soul. A few entered the middle stage of nascent soul, and very few entered the late stage of nascent soul. There were only 4 or 5 in the entire celestial pole in the past thousands of years. Many nascent soul cultivators reached the peak of their realm after hundreds of years of cultivation but lacked fated chances to advance. Their master, Lord Daoist Jinghe, was the same. If it was really such a treasure, it was no wonder so many nascent soul cultivators went to Jade Palace. Yes. As Qin Shi spoke, he then shook his head. But it's hard to say. Such a treasure already appeared last time. How could it be so coincidental that it appeared again this time? I'm a bit worried about Master's trip. Mo Chenga nodded, feeling a bit heavy. With so many nascent soul cultivators, if there was a conflict. But with Master's strength, it shouldn't be difficult for him to stay alive. The two of them pondered each other for a while, then Qin Shi said, Master knows what he's doing, so we don't need to worry about him. It's getting late. Let's retrieve your father's remains and get out of here as soon as possible. Yes. Mo Chenga stood up and pondered for a moment. She then lowered her head to look at the heavenly aromatic herbs that covered the entire mountain. Since we've encountered them, why don't we take some of these heavenly aromatic beans back? It'll be easier to exchange for the chalcedony. Qin Shi stared at these heavenly aromatic beans and recalled what she almost experienced. He felt displeased and said, What do you want them for? I found the chalcedony. The two of them had only been apart for such a short period of time, and he already had a chalcedony? From inside his robe, Qin Shi took out the Xian Fire Jade essence. It was sparkling, translucent, and about the size of 2 palms. Where did you get such a good chalcedony? Mo Chenga was pleasantly surprised as she took the chalcedony. This kind of chalcedony was at least several thousand years old. Furthermore, it didn't have the slightest trace of impurities. It was definitely a high-quality chalcedony. More importantly, there was enough chalcedony. Even if he failed, he could refine it again. Qin Shi smiled. The Wan and Feng duo from Biyun sect gave it to me. In the end, it was for Master's sake. Mo Chenga raised her head and smiled. Master's reputation is really valuable. Such a big chalcedony can't be bought outside. Qin Shi also smiled. This is great. Your heaven and earth fan can finally be refined. And the other materials had long been prepared. They also found the Qiyun stone, and now they also had the 1,000-year-old chalcedony. They could refine magic weapons after returning from Demonic Mountain. Mo Chenga put the chalcedony into her Qingkuan bag. The two of them rested for a while, then summoned their flying magic weapons, planning to leave Lonely Peak. The two of them flew into the air. Qin Shi stood on the flying cloud and looked down at the heavenly aromatic beans that covered the entire mountain. He frowned and raised his hand. Fire spiritual aura gathered in his palm, forming a fireball. With a wave of his hand, the fireball fell on the mountain peak and burst into flames. Upon seeing this, Mo Chenga shouted, You're burning all of them? These heavenly aromatic herbs had been rooted here for a longer time than the spiritual plants in her virtual sky world. Wouldn't it be a pity to burn them? Qin Shi snorted. Keeping them is also a scourge. These things might be useful to others, but for him they were really unpleasant memories. Mo Chenga thought about it and felt he was right. Without these heavenly aromatic herbs, she wouldn't have almost experienced such a terrible thing, so she didn't say anything. The fire grew bigger and bigger, engulfing the entire peak. Soon, all the heavenly aromatic herbs were burned, and the heavenly aromatic beans in the fire made crackling sounds. Seeing that all the heavenly aromatic herbs were burned, Qin Shi held her in his arms. Let's go. Mo Chenga nodded. It was good to burn them all. Burning them made her feel better. She didn't want to recall that memory. By the way, where's Jing Xingji? She suddenly thought of this question. Qin Shi said faintly, I told him to go first. He looked down and glanced at Mo Chenga. I think you'll be unhappy to see him. Mo Chenga was touched. She really didn't want to see Jing Xingji again. It was hard for him to even think of this. The two of them followed the feng shui compass left by Lord Daoist Jinghe and smoothly went out of the fog. Lord Daoist Jinghe once said they were in the depths of Immortal's ruins. There were too many dangers, and it wasn't a place core formation cultivators like them should come to. Qin Shi also knew this, so he took Mo Chenga back to tens of thousands of feet peak. A day later, after several close calls, the two of them finally returned to their original route. Qin Shi breathed a sigh of relief. There aren't any demonic beasts here. If we're careful, we should be able to reach our destination in half a day. Mo Chenga was a little excited when she thought of their destination. She nodded. And the two of them walked along the rocks and entered a dense forest. Be careful. Qin said, this is bone-eroding wood. Just a little bit will make you rot into a pile of bones in an instant. Mo Chenga was shocked. Its toxicity is so strong? If we take it out, won't it be terrible when we fight against enemies? Qin shook his head. We can't take it out. Although the toxicity of this bone-eroding wood is strong, it disappears very quickly. After it's unearthed, its toxicity will completely disappear in about a day. Putting it in a jade box won't work. I see. The two of them propped up their protective spiritual aura, released their defensive magic weapons and cautiously entered the forest. This way. Qin led the way, flying close to the ground. The area of this bone-eroding wood was quite large. The two of them were afraid of touching the leaves, so it took them a long time to get out of the forest. After passing through the forest of bone-eroding wood, the scenery in front of them changed. The sky was dark and the ground was full of holes of various sizes. Some of the holes were still burning, making the surroundings look dark red. Mo Chenga looked around and asked, why does this place look like this? These holes were too small, so they obviously weren't volcanoes, but there were so many of them, which was really strange. Qin said, these are traces left by ancient immortals who used fire magic. Fire spell? Mo Chenga stared at the endless ruins, yearning in her heart. What kind of powerful spell would be able to leave behind such a huge trace? Maybe these things were only done casually by an ancient immortal. Let's go. This way. Qin once again summoned his flying cloud. He pulled Mo Chenga, floated in the air and slowly flew to the right. In the bone-eroding wood forest they could only fly close to the ground, but above these holes they could only fly high. These were fire elemental spells left behind by the immortals. They were not something that the three great true fires of today could compare to. Although the three great true fires were powerful, they were mortal fires. These were immortal fires. If the immortal cultivators were to face them, they would definitely not be able to withstand it. After flying for a while, they still hadn't flown out of the ruins, so Qin suddenly descended. Senior Martial Brother? Mo Chenga called out, where are we going? Qin said firmly, it's down there. Mo Chenga looked down, but there were only several dazzling holes below, and there was no other place to go. While she was feeling bewildered, Qin's flying cloud was still descending, flying into one of the holes. Senior Martial Brother. This was an immortal fire. If it burned them, they wouldn't be able to bear it. Qin held her hand and comforted her. It's okay. Don't worry. Just as the flying cloud was about to touch the immortal fire in the hole, it suddenly flew over the immortal fire and crashed into the wall of the hole. The flying cloud was extremely fast. Just as it was about to crash into the wall, Mo Chenga saw a cave on the wall, and the flying cloud flew into the cave in an instant. We're here. Qin withdrew the flying cloud, looked at the cave and sighed. It's been more than 80 years. I didn't expect to come back here again. Mo Chenga glanced around. Although the entrance of the cave was very small, the inside of the cave was very spacious. She was surrounded by dark red rock walls, which looked terrifying. Is this the place where my father died? Mo Chenga couldn't help but walk inside. After walking for a while, she stopped. At the bottom of the cave there was a stone platform. On the stone platform lay a withered skeleton. Scattered clothes hung on the body, and it was clean without any flesh, leaving only white bones. Mo Chenga couldn't move her eyes away from this skeleton. She slowly moved until she reached the stone platform and gently knelt down. Father, I finally get to see you? Although it was just a skeleton and she couldn't see any traces of her father, Mo Chenga still couldn't help but cry. She remembered many things. Her lonely childhood, her sick mother, the days when she and her mother depended on each other for survival. At that time, she longed for her father to come back and live happily with her family. But he didn't come back even when her mother passed away. At that time, it wasn't that she didn't hate her father, but she always thought that maybe her father also had his own difficulties. It wasn't that he didn't come to pick her up, but he definitely had other things to do. She guessed the result correctly, but she didn't guess the reason correctly. It wasn't that her father didn't come to pick her up because he had other things to do, but he died here. Before he died, he entrusted her to the only person he could trust. Unfortunately, due to a strange combination of factors, she wandered from place to place for 10 years. Finally, the person he entrusted her to found her, sheltered her for several decades, and even became her lover. Qin gently knelt down beside her. Brother Yi, this is probably the last time I'll call you Brother Yi. Today I came here because Chenga came to collect your remains, and I also came to give you an explanation. I've done what I promised you all these years. Chenga has already grown up and become a core formation cultivator. My responsibility has finally come to an end today. He turned to look at Mo Chenga, smiled and held her hand tightly. He then continued to say, Brother Yi, that day you said that if your daughter had a pure Yin constitution and spiritual roots, I'd be in charge of dual cultivation. I'm well aware of what you're implying. Although today's result is the same, I want to make it clear to you that Chenga and I love each other, so this has nothing to do with you. Can rest assured. Chapter 305. After a simple ceremony with Qin Shi, Mo Chenga apologized to the skeleton and put it into the jar she prepared one by one, preparing to take it back to the secular world and bury it with her mother. When she was traveling in the foundation building realm, she wanted to go back to the Mo family's village. At that time she had already entered the territory of Jin, but she was attracted by the spiritual aura fluctuation of Ziwei's immortal's cave. It had been 76 years since she went back. 76 years. Her grandparents and uncles must have turned into skeletons and Tianjun and the others must have died, right? She didn't know if her mother's grave was taken care of. In a few days, she planned to go back to the Mo family's village in Jin to move her mother's remains and second uncle's ashes back to the Yi family's ancestral grave. After putting away her father's remains, Mo Chenga looked up and carefully looked at the cave they hid in. The rock walls were illuminated by the immortal fire, which was very hot. Did you hide here? Qin Shi crouched down and poked the corner with the 3-yang real fire sword as if he was looking for something. When he heard her voice he answered, When the restrictions on Demonic Mountain collapsed, your father and I hid in tens of thousands of feet peak. After things stabilized a bit, we found we couldn't get out, so we went to Immortal's ruins. The reason I came here is because I want to cultivate a secret technique. At that time your father was seriously injured. If we left him alone he wouldn't have lived for more than a few days. He saved me on the way, so I brought him here. I see. This was indeed the best place to practice Yang spells. Fire was the most important element of Yang, especially since this place was full of immortal fire. After a while, Qin Shi breathed a sigh of relief and stood up. I finally found it. Mo Chenga asked curiously, What are you looking for? Qin Shi walked back and spread his hands. Here, it's this. Several pitch-black stones lay in his palm. Mo Chenga picked one up and felt the heat was pressing down on her. She thought about it and was surprised. Are these fire essence stones? Qin Shi nodded with a smile. Yes, they are. The so-called fire essence stone was a kind of ore produced in places with abundant real fire and was commonly known as the essence of fire. In the beginning the fire essence stone was red. As the real fire essence stone burned for a long time, the red became darker and darker until it finally turned black. These fire essence stones were pitch black in color. Clearly they were of the highest grade. This is what you want to get? Yes. Qin Shi said, Back then I found fire pit stones in this fire pit. I tried my best to take them out of the immortal fire, but the fire was still too strong. I couldn't take them away, so I hid them here. So, you wanted to come back then? There's nothing we can do about it. Back then, you left in such a hurry that you didn't even take your father's corpse with you. Naturally you have to come back. When he mentioned this matter, Mo Chenga once again recalled what he said. Right, what did my father promise you back then? Why did you say that the matter of dual cultivation is up to you? Upon hearing this, Qin Shi coughed and looked away. Upon noticing that his face was a bit red, Mo Chenga became even more curious. What? Is there something you can't say? There's no harm in telling you. Qin Shi smiled and said slowly, No matter which cultivator you tell about a pure Yin constitution, they might be tempted. Your father thought of this, so he said this. This means that I can choose a dual cultivation partner for you, no matter who it is. You can also choose yourself? Your father indeed had this intention. But I didn't have this idea at that time. Believe me, upon seeing him hurriedly denying it, Mo Chenga smiled. It's not like I don't believe you. What's the rush? She sighed and said, I understand what my father meant. In that case, although I don't have the freedom to perform dual cultivation, I can still cultivate diligently. I also have a backer. Relatively speaking, I still have a future. If the person her father entrusted to wasn't him, this would probably be her future. Correct. Qin Shi said, I won't deny that back then. If you really had a pure Yin constitution and spiritual roots, it would be good for Shenqing school to accept you as a disciple and have dual cultivation with other disciples. But you ran away by yourself, so I didn't think about this matter anymore. The two of them were silent for a while. Emo Chinga smiled and said, "Forget it. Let's not talk about this anymore. We've already achieved our goal. Are we going to leave now?" She nodded. "Master specifically reminded me to leave as soon as we finished our business. He said there might be a collapse of a big restriction this time, and it might be even bigger than last time. It wouldn't be good if we got implicated." Emo Chinga didn't object. Aside from being fed heavenly aromatic beans, she didn't suffer any injuries. The effects of the heavenly aromatic beans had long worn off, so she had abundant spiritual power now. "Then let's go. It'll be half a month and 3 to 5 days. It's hard to say when the restriction at the entrance of Demonic Mountain will appear." The two of them rested for a while, prepared everything and went out the way they came. Emo Chinga looked at the countless holes on the ground burning with immortal fire. She suddenly thought of something and asked Shi, "Even the ordinary stones here probably have the power of immortal fire sealed in them, right?" Shi nodded. "Yes. Why do you ask?" Emo Chinga said, "Then, do you have a way to get some up here?" She glanced at her but didn't say anything. He took out the 3-yang real fire sword, which emitted a dazzling light. The sword light shot straight down and instantly shot back. He stretched out his hand and used his fire spiritual aura to catch several stones. He handed them to her and said, "Put them in a jade box." They were just ordinary stones. Even if they were calcined by immortal fire, they should still be preserved in a jade box. Emo Chinga obediently put them in the jade box and asked him to use the 3-yang real fire sword to get some more stones back. Only when the jade box was full did she put it into her Chinkuan bag. After watching her put the stones away, she asked, "You don't practice fire spells. What do you need these stones for?" Emo Chinga smiled and patted her spiritual beast pouch. "You forgot that I have Xiaohua." She suddenly understood. That little spiritual beast was born with sun real fire. If it practiced well, it would definitely be a good helper in the future. After thinking for a while, she said, "You have Xiaohua for spiritual beasts, and you have the soul refining art for unique skills. If you refine the heaven and earth fan, you won't lose to ordinary middle-stage core formation cultivators in fights of magical powers. If the power of the heaven and earth fan is amazing, you can also fight against late-stage core formation cultivators. However, you'd better practice several secret techniques. There are always variables in fights of magical powers, so save some unique skills to save your life." Emo Chinga also thought about this. Her best unique skill to save her life was the virtual sky world. Of course, after the incident with Ren Yufeng, she realized that no unique skill was completely reliable, so she'd better prepare several backup plans. "Unfortunately, we didn't get any useful treasures on this trip. Otherwise, your cultivation level could also improve." Emo Chinga thought about it and held back her words. She wasn't in a hurry to improve her cultivation level. She had an unlimited supply of clear sky pills and her qualifications weren't bad. Reaching the peak stage of the core formation realm was only a matter of time. This time she found the 1,000-year-old chalcedony and the Chiyun stone, so she was already very happy. "Senior Marshal Brother, now that you've found the fire essence stone, are you going to enter closed-door meditation when we go back?" She nodded. He keenly noticed that she was a bit depressed, so he asked, "What's wrong? Are you unhappy?" Emo Chinga was stunned for a while then sighed. "I think this time you must be very confident in advancing to the nascent soul realm, right? At that time, our cultivation levels will be one big realm apart." "What's the matter?" She said with a smile. "Which pair of dual cultivation partners doesn't have a cultivation level gap? Even among the Wan and Feng couple, Ding Wan's cultivation level is slightly higher than Feng Zhao's, but don't they still cultivate and live together?" "That's true. But Emo Chinga always felt that the cultivation level gap between them was a bit too big. It wasn't that there weren't nascent soul cultivators and core formation cultivators who became partners, but relatively speaking, the proportion of female cultivators among nascent soul cultivators was very small. Many male cultivators married core formation female cultivators, but their dual cultivation relationships were mostly subordinate. Of course, she wasn't worried about Qin Shi. How could she not trust him now? However, this couldn't go on. Cultivators in the same realm should communicate more and help each other so their relationship would be more stable. Qin Shi thought for a while then said, "What I said last time, we'll practice the same cultivation technique. Have you thought about it?" "About that? It's a good method. You were very confident last time, so did you prepare for it?" Qin Shi smiled. "Of course." Emo Chinga was curious. "You know our physiques are special, and the cultivation technique we practice is also special. Does the dual cultivation technique you mentioned also have this miraculous effect? Qin Shi smiled but didn't answer. He was anxious because of her urging, so he just said, "You'll know later." The two of them talked all the way back along the path they came from. After half a day they finally returned to tens of thousands of feet peak. They spent another day going down from tens of thousands of feet peak. Once they were out of the range of tens of thousands of feet peak, both of them heaved sighs of relief. There were many dangers in Immortal's ruins, so it was much safer down there. But after a while Mo Tiange was surprised. What are they doing? This was the third time she saw a group of people fighting each other. They fought irrationally and flesh and blood flew everywhere. The scene was so tragic that she couldn't bear to see it. Qin Shi frowned and said, "The restrictions on Demonic Mountain only disappear for about a month, and it's already been more than half a month. Presumably, these people have already found all the treasures they can find inside, and those who can't can only target other people." Mo Tiange also heard a lot of these things. But this time the people fighting each other had extremely high cultivation levels. Most of them were in the core formation realm, and there were very few in the foundation building realm. She thought about Jade Palace again. So many nascent soul cultivators went there for the same unique treasure, so a fierce battle was inevitable. This time, even if the restrictions on Demonic Mountain didn't collapse, many people would have died. The two of them had achieved their purpose of entering Demonic Mountain, so they didn't want to get involved in these things. Whenever they encountered a fight they avoided it. But they were lucky. They often encountered fights where both sides were injured or even killed, so they took a lot of Chenkuan bags along the way. These Chenkuan bags alone were already a great fortune. After picking up another batch of Chenkuan bags, Mo Tiange smiled until her eyes narrowed. It's really interesting. They fight to death, but we're better off picking up ready-made treasures. Qin Shi also smiled and said shamelessly, "If everyone was as smart as us, of course we wouldn't be able to pick up any treasures. Put them all away. Maybe there are some treasures inside." Mo Tiange didn't stand on ceremony and put all the Chenkuan bags into her bosom. There were so many of them. They might even be richer than her own net worth. Just as they were counting, they suddenly heard a muffled thunder in the sky. Qin Shi looked up and saw that in the sky, where spiritual aura and devil aura intertwined, the wind and clouds surged and violently collided. The spiritual aura and devil aura in Demonic Mountain instantly became chaotic. Not good. The restrictions collapsed. Chapter 306. It wasn't his first time experiencing the collapse of restrictions, so Qin Shi was very calm. He unfolded the three-young real fire sword, spread the sword formation and flew forward while pulling Mo Tiange. The flying cloud reached its maximum speed, flying towards the exit of Demonic Mountain. Along the way, countless cultivators flew towards the exit in unison. This was the time to escape, so everyone used their trump cards. No one dared to hold anything back. Even so, some cultivators who couldn't escape in time were sucked into the collapsing restrictions and instantly turned into black ashes. Mo Tiange saw with her own eyes that Taoist Kumu and Tong Tianyun, who came with them, were also sucked into the restrictions and died instantly. Not long after they entered Demonic Mountain, they were separated from those two people. Later they learned from Jing Xingji that those two people indeed harbored evil intentions. They left Madame Feng in the lurch and watched as Lei Dongqing perished, but the two of them relied on that 10,000-year-old spiritual plant to hook up with a nascent soul cultivator and enter Immortal's ruins. Now that the two of them appeared here, they probably didn't get any benefits even if they helped the nascent soul cultivators. Shi and Qin Shi, who had nascent soul masters, didn't think about going in with Lord Taoist Jinghe. Did they really think those nascent soul cultivators would protect them for a 10,000-year-old spiritual herb? Maybe they knew, but their lifespans were about to run out, so they didn't care. The restrictions collapsed faster and faster, and the rumbling sounds were endless. Countless cultivators rushed towards the exit. Qin Shi was calm at first, but he became anxious later on. Such a big movement was even more terrible than the 180 years ago. Master was right. This time was more dangerous than last time. But no matter how fast they ran, they couldn't outrun the collapsing restrictions. Soon, the cultivators not far behind them were also sucked in, and their screams were endless. "No!" Mo Tiange shouted, "We can't escape like this." How could Qin Shi not know that? But where could they find a safe place at this time? Last time, when the restrictions on Demonic Mountain collapsed, he and Yihai were lucky to hide in the cave on tens of thousands of feet peak. Otherwise they definitely couldn't escape. At this time he couldn't afford to hold back anymore. The sword formation spread out and shone brightly, blocking more and more drifting restrictions in the air. His hands didn't stop moving as he fished out several treasures from his Chinkuan bag. He patted some on himself and gave some to Emo Chenga. He said anxiously, "At least it can block them for a while." The sound of thunder resounded overhead. Emo Chenga's expression changed. She heard Qinshi say, "It's too late. I can only risk it." Right after he said that, he made a hand seal and circulated the spiritual aura in his body. He was about to use a secret technique. Emo Chenga was startled. Although she didn't know what kind of secret technique Qinshi was using, she could tell he was using his blood essence. Once such a spell was used, the best result would be a period of rest, but the worst result would be a regression in cultivation. He was already at the peak stage of the core formation realm. If his cultivation level regressed, he didn't know how long it would take for him to reach the nascent soul realm. "Senior brother, don't." Qinshi didn't pay attention to her. Several drops of blood essence were forced out of his body. He stretched out his hand and wiped it, and the blade of his sword instantly shone with a red light. Just as he was about to activate the 3-yang real fire sword, his spiritual aura suddenly became unstable, and the red light on the 3-yang real fire sword dimmed. His expression changed. He used his blood essence to search for Emo Chenga's whereabouts before, so he lost some of his strength. Now he couldn't even use the secret technique. Qinshi was really anxious when he realized this. He was very calm before because of this secret technique. At worst he could take Emo Chenga out even if he got injured. But he didn't expect that he couldn't use the secret technique because he used his blood essence before. Chenga? His mind was full of thoughts. In the end, Qinshi clenched his teeth, pulled Emo Chenga's hand and said, "If we can't escape, we'll die together." He didn't wait for her to answer and once again turned into a flight light, flying towards the exit. Their lives were at stake now. All of a sudden, Emo Chenga pulled his hand back and stopped. "Chenga?" Qinshi was anxious. "What's wrong?" Emo Chenga looked up with a solemn expression. Black clouds surged and covered the whole sky. Obviously, the initial instability of the restrictions triggered the collapse of a large area of the restrictions in the sky. If this continued, it would only take a while for the restrictions to collapse here. Although Qinshi's flying cloud was extremely fast, it was really hard to say whether he could escape or not. Qinshi was anxious. "If we don't leave now, it'll be too late." Emo Chenga didn't say anything. She held his waist, gathered spiritual aura on her fingertips, and touched the space between her eyebrows. A huge round bead loomed between her eyebrows, emitting a hazy white light. Qinshi's eyes widened. The sound of wind and thunder in the sky became more intense. The speed at which the restrictions collapsed was faster than they expected. People were constantly being sucked in. They didn't even have time to scream before they disappeared without a trace. Emo Chenga silently recited an incantation and cast the incantation on the bead. The white light suddenly exploded, engulfing the two of them. When the white light disappeared, Qinshi was stunned. Bamboo house, bamboo forest, a gentle breeze, a flowing brook, and the smell of medicine lingering around the tip of his nose. It was a somewhat familiar but completely different scene. After entering the virtual sky world, Emo Chenga breathed a sigh of relief. Feifei wagged its tail, threw itself into her arms and squeaked. She smiled and hugged Feifei affectionately. In the end, she patted its head and released Xiaohua from the spiritual beast bag, letting the two of them play. She took a closer look. The medicinal field hadn't been cleaned for a long time, and weeds had grown in it again. She took out 2 stone sculpture puppets from her Chenkuan bag and told them to clean up the medicinal field. These 2 puppets had extraordinary strength, so they were just right to do these chores for her. When she was done, she looked up and saw that Qinshi had finally come back to his senses. There was shock in his eyes but also understanding. When his eyes met hers, he sighed and said, "I finally understand. Turns out this is your biggest secret." Emo Chenga smiled, pulled him into the bamboo house, picked up a praying mat and threw it to him. "You don't need to ask about other things, right?" Qinshi gradually understood. Her pill concocting skills, her medicinal pills, her 10,000-year-old spiritual plants, her spiritual beasts cultivation levels, and all her puzzling things originated from here, the virtual sky world. He thought for a while and asked, "Where did you get this virtual sky world? It shouldn't be a gift from your great ancestor, right?" Emo Chenga shook her head. "No." Zhong Muling said there were only 2 known virtual sky worlds, and both of them belonged to deification cultivators. How could he have given her one? Even if he had one, she was only a foundation-building cultivator back then, so he wouldn't have given it to her. "Then how did you get it?" Emo Chenga thought for a while then said, it can be considered a fated chance. When I got it, I didn't know what it was. Later, when I entered my great ancestor's virtual sky world, I realized it was this thing. At that time? She nodded in understanding. No wonder your cultivation level rose so fast from then on. It turned out it wasn't only because you obtained the art of the origin, but also because you obtained such a heaven-defying treasure. Mo Chinga smiled when she saw that his tone was full of emotion, but there was no greed in his eyes. Letting him know such a big secret was originally a gamble. Fortunately, he hadn't betrayed her trust so far. Aren't you going to ask why I didn't tell you? She smiled when he heard this question. He reached out to touch her face and said, "Do you need to ask? Even if it was me, I wouldn't tell such a big secret to others. An ordinary man is innocent, but treasuring a jade ring becomes a crime. This is especially true in the cultivation world. It's best that you know how to protect yourself." Mo Chinga looked up at him and asked, "So, if I never told you, you wouldn't blame me?" She shook his head. "Why would I blame you? Even if you never told me for the rest of your life, I wouldn't blame you. In fact, I think it's already quite risky for you to bring me here today. Are you so sure I won't have any bad intentions after seeing this virtual sky world?" Mo Chinga hesitated for a moment, then answered, "I didn't have time to think about anything else just now. I just thought we couldn't die there. Besides, this virtual sky world has already recognized me as its master. You can't hurt me here." "If I were really scheming, I wouldn't have hurt you here," she said. She said, "If nothing happens to me here after I learn your secret, but I imprison you and interrogate you after we go out, what would you do?" His tone was harsh and even accusatory. Mo Chinga was stunned and asked, "Isn't it good for me to trust you?" She sighed and said, "I know you trust me, but it's hard to judge a person's heart. Trust sometimes comes with a price, and the price you have to pay is too high. If you're not careful, you'll be crushed to pieces." Seeing that Mo Chinga lowered her head after being scolded, she smiled again. "Of course I can be an exception, but there can't be a next time, understand?" Mo Chinga smiled. "Of course there won't be a next time. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have brought you here." She had thought about this question many times. If it weren't for today's life-threatening situation, she wouldn't have brought Qinshi here. In fact, after bringing him here, she was also nervous, but Qinshi's reaction just now made her feel that her trust was worth it. Thinking of today's dangerous situation, she asked worriedly, "Master is still in Immortal's ruins. Will he be in danger?" This question made Qinshi silent for a while. How could he not be worried? But now that the great restriction on Demonic Mountain had collapsed, they couldn't go out. "Master won't die so easily," he said. "Let's take care of ourselves first. After a few days, when the restriction is stable, we'll look for Master's whereabouts." Mo Chinga also didn't have any good ideas, so she could only do this. Feeling the heavy atmosphere between them, she smiled and said, "Since we're here, I'll take you to see the medicinal field. My pill concocting skills aren't as good as yours, so you might be able to give me some advice on how to deal with these spiritual plants." As she spoke, she pulled him to the medicinal field and told him about some things in the virtual sky world. She looked at the densely packed medicinal plants in the medicinal field and was shocked for a long time. He then sighed and said, "These medicinal plants are enough for a big cultivation group to use for hundreds of years. If they're not picked excessively, they'll be enough to support a cultivation group to dominate the celestial pole. That's true, but I don't dare to take them out. A 10,000-year-old spiritual plant can make nascent soul cultivators fight for it. With so many, I don't know what kind of turmoil it will cause." "And you're right." She agreed. "Even if they rot here, we can't take them out casually. Otherwise, not only will you be in trouble, but the celestial pole will also be in chaos." He lowered his head and looked at the surrounding medicinal fields. There were many spirit herbs that he had only heard of in legends but had never seen before. These spirit herbs had been trimmed, and their ages ranged from 10,000 years to 1,000 years to a few hundred years. Some of them had only just sprouted. "You said the virtual sky world has existed for hundreds of thousands of years, but why are the oldest spiritual plants only tens of thousands of years old?" Mo Chinga learned about this from the memory in the virtual sky world. Spiritual plants also have a lifespan. Generally, their lifespan ranges from 10,000-year-old to tens of thousands of years, so it's best to pick them and refine them into medicinal pills when they're 10,000-year-old. Because at that time, their medicinal properties have reached their limit. If they continue to grow, they'll die. "I see." It was Qinshi's first time hearing about this. In the current cultivation world, 10,000-year-old spiritual plants rarely appeared, so no one really knew about this. Standing in the middle of the medicinal field, Mo Chenga looked at the many spiritual plants that had reached 10,000 years old. She then looked at the two busy stone sculpture puppets and said with a smile, "Since we can't go out, help me tidy up the medicinal field." Chapter 307. After the big restriction on Demonic Mountain collapsed, many smaller restrictions followed suit. Almost half of Demonic Mountain was involved. Mo Chenga and Qin Shi were lucky. They entered the virtual sky world in time and weren't affected. The others, however, weren't so lucky. Very few of them managed to escape Demonic Mountain in time. Even many nascent soul cultivators perished inside. This trip to Demonic Mountain was even more tragic than the one over 80 years ago. The casualties of high-level cultivators were disastrous, even more serious than the demonic beast riot last time. The celestial pole was in an uproar. Of course, the two of them didn't know about these things yet. While hiding in the virtual sky world, Mo Chenga occasionally opened it to look at the situation outside. She found that the chain reaction caused by the collapse of the restriction hadn't stopped. The sky fell, the earth cracked, lightning flashed, and the whole Demonic Mountain shook. Since they couldn't go out, the two of them had to put aside the things outside for the time being and live their own lives in the virtual sky world. First of all, Qin Shi lost some strength because he used his blood essence. Fortunately, the concentration of spiritual aura in the virtual sky world was extremely high, so it was faster to heal here than outside. But the strange thing was that Qin Shi said the spiritual aura here had to be transformed by the art of 3 primordial cycles before he could quickly absorb it into his dantian. Otherwise, his cultivation speed wouldn't be much faster than outside. The two of them pondered this situation for a long time and finally guessed that the world had changed. Cultivation techniques had also evolved, and the virtual sky world still maintained the concentration of spiritual aura from the distant past era, which was why the situation occurred. Mo Chenga wasn't affected because she practiced cultivation techniques from the distant past era. As for Qin Shi, his art of 3 primordial cycles originated from the distant past era. But Mo Chenga also thought that his pure yang technique came from Yuan Bao, who lived in Zhong Muling's virtual sky world all year round, so why couldn't he? After asking Qin Shi, he also couldn't understand. Perhaps Yuan Bao thought he wouldn't enter the virtual sky world again, so he didn't tell him some trick? The two of them couldn't understand this problem with their cultivation levels, so they simply left it behind. In any case, it wasn't like they couldn't cultivate here. Secondly, since they couldn't leave the virtual sky world, Mo Chenga had nothing to do, so she simply tidied up the medicinal fields with Qin Shi. She had picked many 10,000-year-old spiritual plants but hadn't refined them into medicinal pills yet. There were still many spiritual plants growing in the medicinal fields. She instructed the two puppets to pick them one by one and reorganize the medicinal fields. These spirit grasses were refined into pills by them. Qin Shi's pill concocting skills were also extremely high. With the two of them working together, their pill concocting speed became much faster. A year later, the medicinal fields were finally tidied up. At this time, Qin Shi's injuries were almost healed, so Mo Chenga began to consider refining her natal magic weapon. Before this, she originally planned to ask the group's tools refiners to refine tools for her, but she didn't know how long she'd have to stay in the virtual sky world, so she could only rely on herself for everything. Thus, she began to learn tool refining again. However, her talent in tool refining really wasn't very good. There were spiritual plants everywhere in the virtual sky world, but there weren't many materials needed for tool refining. In the end, it was Qin Shi who couldn't bear to see her like this, so he personally refined for her. Qin Shi's talent in miscellaneous studies was higher than hers. Whether it was pill concocting, tool refining, or even talisman crafting, he had a considerable level of skill. However, he did not dare to be careless when it came to refining a natal magic treasure, so he spent a lot of time practicing again. The two of them slowly cultivated while learning how to refine weapons. Just like that, years passed by. In the beginning, Mo Chenga often went to see what was going on outside the virtual sky world, but the collapse of Demonic Mountain this time lasted for a long time. In the end, she only went to see it after a long time. When she opened the virtual sky world again and saw that it was still dark outside, Mo Chenga sighed. This was already the 5th year, but the restrictions were still unstable. She really didn't know when they could go out. Before the restrictions collapsed, Master went to Jade Palace. She didn't know whether he escaped or not. Jinji had been missing for several years at that time. Could he go back now? Don't think about it. When the time comes, you'll naturally be able to go out. Qin Shi's voice came from behind her. Mo Chenga waved her sleeves, erased the scene outside, then turned around. Why did you come out? They failed to refine the heaven and earth fan once, so he shut himself in his room for many days. He said he couldn't fail again and had to carefully figure out the characteristics of the materials. Qinshi smiled. I finished my research, so I came out. Mo Chinga's eyes brightened. Then can we refine it again? And? Qinshi thought for a moment and said, it should be possible. How's your cultivation these days? Very smooth. Mo Chinga reached out her hand. Take a look. Qinshi put his hand on her pulse and separated a wisp of spiritual aura to test her pulse. After a while, he withdrew his spiritual aura and said with a smile, your cultivation here is indeed twice the result with half the effort. With clear sky pills and the virtual sky world, her cultivation speed was simply fast compared to ordinary cultivators. Even if she encountered a bottleneck, she didn't need to worry too much with the experienced Qinshi guiding her. What about you? When will you form your nascent soul? The two of them were trapped here and didn't know when they could go out. Qinshi's cultivation level had reached the peak, and his mentality had also adjusted. It could be said that forming his nascent soul was already a matter of course. This question made Qinshi ponder for a long time. In the end he said, when I form my nascent soul, I'll definitely use the art of 3 primordial cycles as the main method, so forming my nascent soul here won't affect me. But there's no need to worry. Let's refine your natal magic weapon first. Mo Chinga said with a smile. The youngest known person to form their nascent soul in the celestial pole was 208 years old. You're 206 years old now. Forming your nascent soul now can still set a record, but it won't be so sensational in a few years. Don't you want to break this record? Qinshi shook his head and said with a faint smile, what's the point of fighting for these empty titles? There's no harm in delaying it for a year or two. Mo Chinga felt relieved upon hearing what he said. In the past few years, Qinshi's mentality was too impatient, so he failed to form his nascent soul again and again. Now that he was so calm, it could be seen that his mentality was stable. In that case, there wouldn't be any big obstacles when he formed his nascent soul. In fact, Qinshi's mentality was originally very stable. In the past few years he completely walked into the trap he set himself, so a loophole appeared in his mentality. The root of this loophole was Mo Chinga. Now that the two of them were already in love, he naturally restored his original calm and tranquil state of mind. The two of them talked for a while, then went back to their respective cultivations. Their cultivation techniques didn't conflict with each other. One was a pure yang cultivator while the other was a pure yin cultivator, so they complemented each other. Therefore, they didn't need to use 2 separate cultivation rooms and could directly cultivate together in Mo Chinga's original cultivation room. After a day of adjusting their breaths, both their spiritual aura and mentality were restored to their peak, so they prepared to refine magic weapons. Refining a natal magic weapon was different from refining ordinary magic weapons. Even if ordinary magic weapons needed to recognize their master, the owner didn't need to be present during the refining process. Natal magic weapons, on the other hand, had to be refined with a cultivator's blood essence. Therefore, although Qinshi took charge of refining, he still needed Mo Chinga's cooperation. After a failed refinement, Qinshi was particularly cautious this time. Qiyun stones were only enough for them to refine one more time. If they failed again, they would have to look for materials again. However, Qiyun stones were extremely difficult to find, so it might take them several decades to find them. Qinshi used his extreme yang real fire to refine the weapons. Sunstone or Xiaohua's extreme yang real fire were both good, but Qinshi's extreme yang real fire was a bit stronger. He also had countless restorative panaceas to eat, so he chose to use extreme yang real fire. Once everything was ready, the two of them closed themselves in the refining room, laid a barrier to prevent the 2 spiritual beasts from disturbing them, and started refining. This refining process took more than a month. This wasn't a long time for a natal magic weapon. If it weren't for Qinshi's extreme yang real fire melting materials quickly and his previous practice, it would have taken at least a few months. After more than a month, the two of them stepped out of the refining room. The heaven and earth fan was completed. Dragon bones were used as the frame, natural silk brocade as the fan surface, Qiyun stones and bewitching moonlight stones were smelted as paint, and mountains, rivers, flowers, and birds were painted on the fan surface. Finally, it was wrapped in 1,000-year-old chalcedony and refined carefully. The hardness of dragon bones and the toughness of 1,000-year-old chalcedony were combined into one. After the heaven and earth fan was successfully refined, it could basically be said to be the toughest magic weapon. Even Qinshi's 3-yang real fire sword couldn't completely destroy it. In the beginning, the two of them had a dispute about the shape of the magic weapon. Qin Shi naturally thought it should be a round fan, while Mo Chenga insisted on a folding fan. It was fine if she liked to wear palace clothes, but she usually wore Shenqing School's Taoist robes and only had 1 or 2 hairpins in her hair. How would she look holding a round fan? It wasn't as good as a folding fan. It was suitable for both men and women, and if she occasionally wanted to dress up as a man, she could also pretend to be a scholar or something. Qin Shi couldn't argue with her, so he had to comply. When the heaven and earth fan was finished, Mo Chenga couldn't take her eyes off it. The landscape made of Qiun stones and bewitching moonlight stones was so exquisite that it couldn't be distinguished from the real one. The flowers, birds, fish and insects were vivid. Not to mention its real effect, the fan itself was already extremely beautiful. When the two of them came out of the refining room, Qin Shi watched Mo Chenga admiring the heaven and earth fan and teased her. "I said you didn't look like a woman, but it turns out you also like beautiful things." Mo Chenga played with the heaven and earth fan in her hand and said, "Who doesn't like beautiful things? It's just that I'm rarely addicted to them." For example, when she first entered Shenqing School, she also liked the hairpins and rings he gave her, but after enjoying them, cultivation was still the most important thing. Alright, let's try the power of the magic weapon first. Whether it's beautiful or not is secondary. Hearing Qin Shi's reminder, Mo Chenga looked up and asked, "How?" Qin Shi thought about it and said, "This treasure can trap and kill, and it can also trap and defend. How about I try defending first?" Okay. Mo Chenga waved the heaven and earth fan and spread its surface. In an instant, the fan was overflowing with light, reflecting a sparkling and lifelike picture of mountains and rivers. Qin Shi stretched out his left hand and concentrated. With a flash of golden light, the 3-yang real fire sword appeared in his palm. He shook his arm and the sword turned into a golden light. Surrounded by the real fire, it circled around him twice, then suddenly changed direction and rushed towards Mo Chenga. Mo Chenga watched carefully and immediately used the heaven and earth fan. The picture of mountains and rivers suddenly enlarged and shrouded the sword light like real mountains and rivers. After being surrounded by the mountains and rivers, the sword light stopped and revealed the true form of the 3-yang real fire sword. The sword began to move left and right, but it couldn't break through the seemingly invisible mountains and rivers. Finally, Qin Shi withdrew the 3-yang real fire sword and said helplessly, "The sword itself can't break through. It seems I have to use my sword." Mo Chenga was overjoyed that the power of the heaven and earth fan was extraordinary. Even if it was only the 3-yang real fire sword itself, ordinary early-stage core formation cultivators couldn't block it. After this test, she had great confidence in the heaven and earth fan. Chapter 308. Qin Shi's 3-yang real fire sword was also a natal magic weapon. Although it also used sword moves, it was different from a sword cultivator's sword. Generally, sword cultivators had already chosen their main sword when they were in the foundation building realm or even the aura refining realm. After that, they couldn't leave this sword for the rest of their lives. Their natal sword was constantly nourished and refined, and its rank would also constantly improve. As their cultivation level increased, it would become more and more powerful. This was similar to natal magic weapons, but natal magic weapons could only be refined after they reached the core formation realm, while sword cultivators could have their natal swords when they were in the aura refining realm. Because of this, sword cultivators were often stronger than ordinary cultivators. Of course, it wasn't only beneficial. If a cultivator's natal magic weapon was damaged, it would often affect the cultivator himself. If a sword cultivator's sword was damaged, the result would be more serious than that of an ordinary cultivator. If it was light, they would be seriously injured. If it was heavy, they would die. Moreover, all the skills of a sword cultivator were on their sword. If they lost their sword, even if they could keep their life, their cultivation level would most likely be crippled. As for Qin Shi, although he used the 3-yang real fire sword as a magic weapon, he didn't rely on it as much as sword cultivators did. His strongest skill wasn't his sword moves. His 3-yang real fire sword was extremely powerful, which often made people mistakenly think his sword moves were very powerful. In fact, his real killing move was the 3-yang real fire on his sword. After explaining this to Mo Chenga, the 3-yang real fire sword in his hand burst into a blazing red light and rushed toward the heaven and earth fan. Mo Chenga unfolded the heaven and earth fan, and the mountains and rivers turned solid, completely surrounding the 3-yang real fire sword. Under the heavy pressure of the mountains and rivers, the sword couldn't break through. At that moment, the sword suddenly glowed red. Qin Shi made a sword art and the 3-yang real fire sword came out. Mo Chenga was very anxious. The mountains and rivers pressed down and firmly pressed the sword, but the three young real fire couldn't block it no matter what. She only felt a threatening aura rising to the sky, and her whole body was surrounded. She circulated her spiritual aura, and the spiritual aura shield of the art of primordial singular energy lit up, but it couldn't block this heat. It only lasted for a while before the spiritual aura shield was also burned. The moment the shield was broken, Qinshi shook his arm and withdrew the three young real fire sword. Mo Chenga stood for a while, calmed down a bit, and also withdrew the heaven and earth fan. Although she knew his three young real fire sword was very powerful, she didn't know it was this powerful. His technique was very simple and could hardly be considered a technique. However, it was precisely because there was no technique that it was not easy to break through. This was because this was a battle of real strength. If one couldn't win against Chu Yang's three young real fire, then they could only be defeated. However, Chu Yang's body was filled with pure yang spiritual energy. After cultivating the three young real fire, its destructive power was even greater than that of the sun real fire. You don't have to be depressed. Seeing that she hadn't spoken for a long time, Qinshi smiled and said, "Not to mention the fact that my three young real fire sword has been nourished for more than 100 years, but based on the gap between our cultivation levels, wouldn't I be too inferior if I couldn't even defeat a cultivator who just formed her gold core?" Mo Chenga regained her senses. It wasn't that she had to compete with Qin Shi, it was just that she was shocked after suddenly witnessing his strength. This also made her realize that she was still very far from the limits of what a core formation cultivator could achieve. Thinking of this, she smiled, held the heaven and earth fan and asked, "What do you think after trying it?" Qin Shi thought for a moment, then said, "It seems your heaven and earth fan has a strong restraining effect on magic weapons. If you encounter sword cultivators in the future, I don't think you'll be at a disadvantage. But when it comes to magic arts, it hasn't used the word trap yet." Mo Chenga also knew that the heaven and earth fan was originally a kind of magic weapon conceived by Mo Yaoqing, but it lacked actual examples. She still needed to figure out how to use it by herself. The word trap alone could be used for both offense and defense, so it wasn't something she could figure out in a short time. "Okay, let's try the effect of the attack again." Qin Shi waved his sleeve, and the three young real fire sword turned into several sword lights that circled around him. Mo Chenga nodded, then opened the heaven and earth fan again. This time it was completely different from before. Smoke and water rushed out, and the mountains and rivers seemed to come alive in an instant. Even the flowers and birds inside appeared real. Qin Shi was stunned for a moment. Just like that, the world suddenly changed. He looked around and found that the scenery around him was exactly the same as the mountains and rivers on the heaven and earth fan, as if he himself had entered the painting. Although he had long known this was the illusory formation on the heaven and earth fan, what he saw and heard in front of him was exactly the same as the real one, so he was still a little shocked. It was really unexpected for a magic weapon that had just been refined to have this kind of power. Thinking up to this point, he frowned and looked around carefully, looking for flaws. Mo Chenga, who was outside the illusory formation, saw Qin Shi turn around for a while inside the illusory formation. He seemed to have found something and showed a smile. Then he used the sword formation and the red light shone brightly. A kind of invincible power spread out. She hurriedly operated her spiritual aura, trying to suppress Qin Shi's counterattack, but the gap between their cultivation levels was obvious. Qin Shi's three young real fire still slowly spread out and finally engulfed the mountains and rivers. This time she failed even more miserably than the last time. Last time, Qin Shi could see it, so he could take back the three young real fire in time. This time, when he broke the formation, he couldn't see it clearly. The three young real fire burned, so Mo Chenga had to give up her defense and escape the range of the three young real fire in a sorry state. When the mountains and rivers dispersed, Qin Shi took back the three young real fire sword. Seeing Mo Chenga standing there thoughtfully, he asked with a smile, "What's wrong? Are you shocked?" Mo Chenga looked away and said in a daze, "Magic weapons alone aren't enough." Qin Shi smiled. The three young real fire disappeared and returned to his dantian. He walked closer and said, "Of course magic weapons alone aren't enough. We're not sword cultivators, we only need to cultivate our swords. We cultivate ourselves. If our cultivation levels aren't strong, our strength will be weak, and our magic weapons naturally won't be so powerful." Mo Chenga cheered up, unfolded the heaven and earth fan and said with a smile, "In any case, this kind of magic weapon is already very strong. If I cultivate well, I'll only become stronger and stronger in the future." It's good that you understand. In terms of cultivation, Mo Chenga's ideas were very similar to his, so they got along very well. Even if there were some differences, they could slowly get used to each other. In the past 5 years, the two of them lived here in seclusion. Sometimes, when he thought about it carefully, he felt that these days were as perfect as a dream. They didn't have fierce personalities. When they were together, they were as calm as water. They were like companions, like teachers and friends, and they occasionally had tender feelings. He thought that was enough. Of course, it wasn't like they didn't have friction. Chenga was strong and unwilling to rely on others. In this relationship, he often unconsciously acted strong. Occasionally there would be quarrels, but later they would compromise with each other and accept each other's ideas and practices. Sometimes, he thought that this was the perfect dual cultivation life he envisioned, right? On the long road to longevity, if there was no one to accompany him, he would always feel lonely in retrospect. But if he was entangled in love, it wasn't what he wanted. Now, he had someone to accompany him and he could focus on cultivation. It was really the best. What are you looking at? Chenga couldn't help but ask, feeling creeped out by his warm eyes. She smiled and suddenly reached out to hold her waist, hugging her tightly. Let's make a blood oath? Chenga was stunned. Huh. She knew what a blood oath was. It was a kind of oath that most Tao companions made, similar to a spiritual beast contract. The two people who made a blood oath could never hurt each other. But the difference between a blood oath and a spiritual beast contract was that after a blood oath was made, there would be a sense between the two people. The other person would know clearly whether the other person was good or bad, dead or alive. She said slowly, I know, you definitely won't be willing to follow me all the time. So, when we occasionally separate with a blood oath between us, I can also know whether you're good or bad. Chenga was speechless for a while. She knew this was his compromise, tacitly agreeing to her freedom. Since he couldn't get an answer from her, she called again. Chenga? Chenga looked up and smiled brightly. Okay. Establishing a blood oath was equivalent to a dual cultivation ceremony. It was even more important than a dual cultivation ceremony. Many dual cultivation partners did not establish a blood oath because most immortal cultivators were suspicious and did not dare to easily make such an oath that they could not get rid of in their entire lives. Therefore, with Chenga's consent, she was overjoyed. He thought for a moment and said, but we can't be too hasty. How about we wait until we go back and report to Master? This conclusion was quickly rejected by him. No, we don't know when we can go out. Chenga found it funny to see him struggling alone. Do we need to do this? Of course, making a blood oath should be more cautious than a dual cultivation ceremony, she said seriously. But I think it's fine as long as the two of us are sincere. You're right, but... He looked ashamed. This is too unfair for you. Unfair for what? Dual cultivation isn't something you can do alone. Chenga held his fingers and said seriously, we're not mortals, so why should we rigidly adhere to mortals' rules? She was stunned, but he didn't say anything. Although he went to Mount Taikang since he was a child, he grew up in a prince's mansion in the secular world, so some of his ideas inevitably carried traces of the secular world. For example, he was unconsciously strong in their relationship. On the contrary, although Chenga stayed in the secular world for a longer time, she was originally an ordinary village girl and didn't have much experience. Many things she heard only after she arrived in Kunwu, so her ideas were more similar to those of cultivators. After pondering for a while, she somewhat understood. He thought for a while and finally said, then let's hold our own wedding? Wedding? She smiled and looked at her gently. You're right. It's fine as long as the two of us are sincere. But I always feel that a dual cultivation ceremony sounds a bit too cold, as if it's just for cultivation. That being the case, let's hold a wedding for the two of us, okay? How could Chenga say no? He was even more willing to give than she wanted. She remembered that when she was a child in family's village, her aunt always wanted Tianxiao to learn cooking and housekeeping so she could marry into a good family. She also vaguely thought about getting married, but at that time she had already set foot on the path to immortality and learned about the existence of the cultivation world from books. She thought that when she went to the cultivation world in the future, she only needed to find a like-minded person. Later, when she arrived in Kunwu, she followed second uncle to many places to avoid the fate of becoming a human furnace. She only wanted to become stronger and didn't even dare to reveal her identity as a woman, so how could she think about dual cultivation? Later, when she met him, although she secretly had feelings for him, she told herself in her heart that she didn't need to think too much about hopeless things and just focused on cultivation. Everything she obtained today was something she originally thought she would never be able to obtain in her lifetime. Alright, I'll listen to you. Chapter 309. In the cultivation world, there was no wedding in the secular world. They called it the dual cultivation ceremony. The dual cultivation ceremony meant that a man and a woman would become dual cultivation partners. This sounded very fair, but just as Qin said, it was filled with an ice-cold callousness. Dual cultivation was still for the sake of cultivation. Therefore, the most important thing to measure a cultivator's worth was their cultivation and talent. Very few of them dual cultivated for the sake of their feelings. Most of them did it for the sake of cultivation. Therefore, many dual cultivation partners would never establish a blood oath. In fact, when benefits were involved, the husband and wife would even turn against each other. Moreover, don't think that just because it wasn't called a wedding, there were no secular affairs. They still talked about dowry and betrothal gifts, but these were all replaced with spirit stones, spiritual treasures, and pills. If it was a marriage alliance between two cultivation clans, then it would be even more troublesome. When it came to haggling, it would definitely not lose to those mortals. Occasionally, Mo Chenga also recalled Yao Zixio and Shang Ruan, whom she met in Ziwei's Immortal's cave. Although they were cultivators, their marriages were even more complicated than mortals. Of course, for people like Mo Chenga and Qin Shi who didn't belong to any clans and had the same master, it would be much simpler. But no matter how simple it was, Mo Chenga was still somewhat opposed to the so-called dual cultivation ceremony. She knew that although she and Qin Shi were martial siblings and they were cultivators in the same realm now, the gap between them wasn't just a little. A cultivator who had reached the peak of the core formation stage and was very likely to advance to the nascent soul stage after a single session of secluded meditation was completely different from a cultivator who had just reached the core formation stage. The former might be able to enter the nascent soul stage in one go and become the pillar of the sect, but the latter still had to rely on the sect. Of course, she believed that one day she would also form her nascent soul, but what about now? If she really went back to report this to her master and held a dual cultivation ceremony, she and Qin Shi would become the topic of conversation among fellow disciples and even outsiders. They would talk about the gap between them and their possible outcomes. She didn't mind other people's opinions, but she didn't like the feeling of being judged. So, when he said that she should hold a wedding for the two of them, she was actually very happy. Since they didn't have any wedding clothes, the two of them found some red clothes from the Chengquan bags they picked up on Demonic Mountain. They made some changes and used them as wedding clothes. If there were no red candles, he would use the fire obsidian stone, which was used to forge weapons, as a red candle. There were no guests, only two stone sculpture puppets observing the ceremony from the side. There were no ceremonial officials. Xiaohua and Feifei were witnesses. Heaven and earth as the witness, the sun and moon as the medium. Dear Master, I raise my cup in a toast. From then on, they were husband and wife. Then he swore a blood oath. Blood essence exchange, you have me and you, I have you and me. After the wedding, the couple sat in the bamboo forest by the stream. There was no sun and moon rotation inside the virtual sky world, so Qin Shi came up with an idea. He wanted her to use an art to tear open the sky inside the virtual sky world. Outside, Demonic Mountain was still shrouded in darkness. Devil aura intertwined, making it seem like night had fallen. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled outside, but the scenery inside was different. The two of them sat for a long time before Qin Shi said with a sigh, "Looks like we'll have to be trapped here for at least 2 to 3 years." Mo Chenga had long been mentally prepared for this. They had been trapped here for 5 years. In the beginning, the earth shook and the mountains collapsed. Even now, the restrictions were still occasionally triggered. 2 to 3 years was already a conservative estimate. If the restrictions remained unstable, it might take more than 10 years. After more than 10 years, the people outside would probably think that they were dead, right? If Master was still here with the natal spirit lamp in hand, of course, he would know that they were still alive, but if Master did not escape, thinking of this, Mo Chenga couldn't help but worry. I don't know if Master escaped. Qin Shi smiled, put his arm around her waist and said, "Don't worry too much. Although Master is usually unreliable, he's faster than anyone else when it comes to escaping. Besides, Master has lived for almost 1,000 years. He's seen more things and experienced more dangers than we do. You won't die here so easily." Mo Chenga accepted his explanation. She knew Master's ability, so although she was worried, she still thought Master could escape. What made her the most uneasy was Jinji. After thinking for a while, Mo Chenga asked, "Did you leave Jinji's blood essence behind?" Qin Shi shook his head. He's only in the foundation building realm. According to convention, he won't leave his natal spirit lamp until he forms his gold core. Mo Chenga was also aware of this point, but she was just asking with hope in her heart. When we entered Demonic Mountain, Zhenji had been missing for many years. I don't know if he has returned. Qin Shi also couldn't answer this question. Yi Zhenji was his disciple. Although he didn't bring him up, he followed him as soon as he built his foundation. He knew Zhenji lacked experience and acted childishly, so when Zhenji wanted to go out to gain experience, he agreed very much. But Zhenji's cultivation level was low, and he didn't have enough experience, so it was really hard to say whether he could turn danger into safety in times of crisis. In the end, Qin Shi said, "Apart from Master, Zhenji is the closest person to us. If something happened to him, we should have sensed it, but we haven't sensed it, so he should be fine." Mo Chenga knew he was just comforting her. Cultivators sensed destiny by chance, so they couldn't sense everything. But in any case, it was good that they didn't sense anything bad. Some things were powerless and could only be left to fate. Seeing that she was troubled, Qin Shi pulled her into his arms and suddenly lowered his head to say in her ear, "It's useless to worry about these things. Let's think about what we should do now." "Do what?" Mo Chenga thought for a while, then said, "Concocting medicinal pills, cultivating, studying cultivation techniques?" "Not that." Qin Shi smiled. "Apart from these, don't we have anything else to do?" From his gaze, Mo Chenga suddenly realized something, so she immediately shut her mouth and stopped talking. Qin Shi couldn't help but laugh at her reaction. "You don't have to feel uneasy. We're not together for dual cultivation or anything else. If you don't want to, we can talk about it later." Mo Chenga hesitated for a moment, then said in a low voice, "Since we're already husband and wife, what's there to be unwilling about?" Hearing this, Qin Shi was delighted and reached out to hug her. "So you, wait." Mo Chenga looked up and stopped him. She smiled slyly and said, "But we haven't made things clear yet." Qin Shi was stunned and puzzled. "What do you want to say?" "There are a lot of things to say. For example, what's your cultivation technique? What's the dual cultivation technique you mentioned? How many secrets do you have?" Seeing that he didn't speak, Mo Chenga glared at him. "What? You can't tell me?" "Fine." Qin Shi said helplessly, "But even if I have some secrets, you should know most of them." "For example?" "For example, the changes in my physique, my cultivation technique, my yang spiritual bead. Don't you already know about all of these?" The yang spiritual bead in his body was his biggest secret, and Mo Chenga had long known about this secret. Mo Chenga thought about it and felt he was right. She had long guessed the secret of the yang spiritual bead. Later, her master even deliberately told her about it. "Then what about the dual cultivation technique you mentioned last time? You should at least tell me about it, right?" Qin Shi always pretended to be mysterious about this matter, saying she would know when the time came. Now that the two of them were husband and wife, it should be time, right? Qin Shi smiled. This time he didn't refuse and asked her, "Do you have the art of Sunu?" Mo Chenga nodded. Both her master and him knew about this matter. Qin Shi put his hand into his Chengkuan bag, took out a jade slip and handed it to her. "Take a look at this." Mo Chenga looked at him in bewilderment. She took the jade slip and probed it with her divine sense. In the next second she was shocked. "This is..." Qin Shi smiled and said, "The yin and yang dual cultivation technique Senior Yuan Bao gave me." This cultivation technique was composed of 3 parts. The first part was the pure yang technique, the second part was the art of Sunu, and the third part was the yin and yang dual cultivation technique. Mo Chenga carefully compared it. Her art of Sunu was basically the same as the art of Sunu in this cultivation technique, with only some small changes. She pondered for a while. Her version might have been modified by Mo Yaoqing according to her cultivation situation, or it might have been obtained by Mo Yaoqing from her cultivation group, so it was originally a different version from Yuan Bao's. Reading up to this point, Mo Chenga was happy on one side and worried on the other. She was happy because dual cultivation for people with pure yang and pure yin constitutions was an extremely fast cultivation speed. This yin and yang dual cultivation technique would be extremely beneficial for the two of them. But she was worried because she didn't simply have a pure yin constitution. It could even be said that her spiritual roots of the origin had a greater impact on her aptitude than her pure yin constitution. If she gave up on the art of the origin and focused on cultivating this yin and yang dual cultivation technique, the gains wouldn't make up for the losses. Qin Shi noticed that her brows were tightly knitted and her expression was constantly changing. He asked, "What's wrong?" Mo Chenga sighed and told him her thoughts honestly. Qin smiled and said, "Are you stupid? Who said you can only cultivate one cultivation technique? I remember you also have the art of the origin given by your great ancestor, right? The cultivation technique you're cultivating now combines the two, so it's naturally the most efficient. But if you cultivate them separately, the difference won't be too big." Mo Chenga was suddenly enlightened. Right? How could I forget? The Sunu art of the origin was a cultivation technique that combined the Taiyuan record and the art of Sunu. However, Zhong Muling also said that this cultivation technique didn't conflict with the two original cultivation techniques. Combining them into one would allow her cultivation efficiency to reach the highest, but if she cultivated them separately, it would only take her a bit more time. Before this, since she already had the Sunu art of the origin, she didn't need to cultivate them separately. But now it was different. With this yin and yang dual cultivation technique, even if she cultivated them separately, the effect would still be excellent. Her mind raced and she said, "Right, maybe we don't need to cultivate them separately. The Sunu art of the origin was comprehended by a deification cultivator, so maybe it can be applied to the dual cultivation technique. Besides, I'm about to form my nascent soul." Qin also thought of a possibility. After I form my nascent soul, my comprehension of cultivation techniques will be incomparable to today's. We'll know when we try it. Mo Chenga smiled. If that's the case, it's completely feasible even if there's a gap in our cultivation levels. Qin nodded and looked down at her. He suddenly said, "Why don't we try it now?" Mo Chenga was about to say she hadn't looked at the cultivation technique carefully, but she suddenly realized what he meant by "try it." Her cheeks immediately burned. We'll talk about this later. No need to talk about it anymore." Qin stopped her. "This day will come." Chapter 310. The two of them were trapped in a paradise-like place, bowed to heaven and earth and made a blood oath. Some things happened naturally. As a result, their originally peaceful and warm days were occasionally filled with sweetness. They weren't enthusiastic people. Even though they committed to dual cultivation, they only enjoyed the faint warmth. Mo Chenga was very satisfied with this kind of life. She didn't feel too lonely and it didn't affect her cultivation. They were together, accompanied each other, discussed cultivation and exchanged thoughts. However, not long after they were together, Qin found something changed. Next was Mo Chenga. She also felt as if there was something stirring inside her dantian. They both noticed the restlessness in each other's eyes. Mo Chenga asked, "Is there something wrong with you?" Qin frowned, nodded and asked, "What about you? Do you also feel?" Mo Chenga was a bit distressed. "Well, what should I do? Will the spiritual aura I get this way be unstable?" How could it be? This question made Qin laugh. If there was a problem, why were there so many people in the cultivation world who practiced dual cultivation? Don't think too much. Just cultivate well. After a pause he said, "I originally planned to advance to the nascent soul realm after a while, but now I can't wait. The spiritual aura in my body is surging, and my dantian and meridians can no longer hold it. If I let it go, it's not good for me, so I have to advance to the nascent soul realm." Oh. Mo Chenga understood. When spiritual aura accumulated to a certain level, the body would automatically request to advance. Presumably he was at this stage now. Then when will you advance to the nascent soul realm? Qin thought for a while then said, 3 days later. I can't suppress this spiritual aura for too long. So soon? Qin stroked her head and smiled. I can't help it. I didn't expect dual cultivation would be like this. Suddenly obtaining so much spiritual aura must be uncomfortable for you. It's better to enter closed-door meditation while I'm advancing to the nascent soul realm. Maybe I can advance to the middle stage of the core formation realm in one go. Mo Chenga nodded and accepted his suggestion. She had been in the core formation realm for 6 or 7 years, and she had been adapting. Now that her natal magic weapon was formed and she gradually learned various cultivation techniques, it was time to continue her closed-door meditation. To enter the intermediate stage of the completion level in one go was very difficult. Ordinary cultivators would need at least 100 years to reach the early stage of core formation. Even geniuses would need 30 to 40 years. Of course, it wasn't like there was no hope at all. The virtual sky world had rich spiritual aura, countless clear sky pills, and the yang spiritual aura she obtained from Qin. If her cultivation went smoothly, she might really be able to advance to the middle stage of the core formation realm during this period of time. But if he did that, there might be a risk of his realm becoming unstable, However, no matter what, the spiritual energy was unstable, so she had to go into seclusion. After the two came to an agreement, they began to prepare for their secluded cultivation in the next 3 days. Over the years, they had refined a lot of elixirs while cleaning up the herb fields, so they didn't need to refine elixirs on the spot. Therefore, it was easy to prepare. They just needed to rearrange the cultivation room for their seclusion. Advancing to the nascent soul realm wasn't the same as cultivating on a normal day. They definitely couldn't be disturbed by others, not even if Mo Chenga just watched from the side. Therefore, they had to have a separate cultivation room. For this reason, Mo Chenga deliberately gave Qin Shi a spirit gathering formation from the Xuanji formation book and asked him to arrange it in a separate cultivation room. Although the formation Qin Shi used was good, he was still inferior to Mo Chenga in this aspect. The Xuanji formation book could be said to be the best secret formation book in the celestial pole. With this book, Mo Chenga's attainments and formations could be ranked first even in the celestial pole. It only took them 1 day to prepare everything. For the next 2 days, the two of them didn't do anything else. They just strolled around, chatted, and relaxed. The state of mind was very important in advancing to the nascent soul realm, and one's mood was also one of the states of mind. On the 3rd day, Qin Shi looked at the time and finally said, "It's almost time." Seeing his serious expression, Mo Chenga couldn't help but ask, "Are you okay?" Qin Shi looked down at her. "What's okay?" Mo Chenga pondered in her heart for a while, then comforted him. "Your cultivation is perfect now and you're full of spiritual aura. Advancing to the nascent soul realm is just a matter of time, so you don't need to be nervous." Qin Shi paused for a moment, then smiled. "Are you afraid I'll have a shadow in my heart because I failed to advance to the nascent soul realm 3 times? Mo Chenga smiled embarrassedly. "I've never advanced to the nascent soul realm, so I can't give you any advice." Before she could finish, Qin Shi heaved a sigh and hugged her. Mo Chenga thought for a moment, then swallowed the rest of her words. She also reached out and hugged his waist. The two of them hugged in silence for a while. Then Qin Shi said softly, "I understand your feelings. Don't worry, I know what I should do." Mo Chenga answered softly. She knew he always had his own ideas. Now that his inner demons had been broken, he knew what he should do. However, she still couldn't help but worry. She had never felt this way before. It wasn't that she hadn't worried about others. When she was a child, it was her mother, and later it was second uncle. But for these two people, even if she worried about them, she didn't have this kind of feeling in her heart all the time. She always thought her feelings were very calm, but now she realized that calm could also be very strong. She couldn't help but hug him tighter, not because she was afraid of losing him, but because she wanted to be closer to him. Under her cheeks, Qin Shi's chest rose and fell, making her feel warm and reliable. Time passed bit by bit. After an unknown amount of time, she finally let go of him. "You, go in." Qin Shi didn't move. He still hugged her waist tightly. "Senior martial brother?" After a long time, he heaved a long sigh. "For the first time, I feel a little reluctant to enter closed-door meditation." Mo Chenga didn't say anything, but a smile appeared on her face. It felt really good to have a response to her feelings. "What are you afraid of?" she said softly. "When you come out, I'll still be here." "But we won't see each other for several years," he said in a low voice. What he said stunned Mo Chenga, but she soon heaved a sigh. This was what cultivators were like. Unless their cultivation levels were similar in the future and they practiced the same cultivation technique, they could avoid the situation where one of them entered closed-door meditation and couldn't see the other for several years. She didn't think the two of them had to stick together, but the feeling of being separated for several years or even several decades from time to time was indeed not very pleasant. However, no matter what happened in the future, soul formation had to be separated. Thinking of this, Mo Chenga urged him again. "It's getting late. Why don't you go in?" Qin Shi still didn't move. Mo Chenga was a bit anxious. This time he didn't choose the time to form his nascent soul. His body had reached its limit. If he delayed for too long, she didn't know whether it would be bad for him or not. She pushed him. "Senior martial brother." Qin Shi moved and said, "What did you call me?" Mo Chenga was stunned. "What?" "I suddenly remembered we're husband and wife now. Shouldn't you change the way you call me?" Mo Chenga couldn't adapt to the sudden change of topic. "But you're my senior martial brother. Otherwise, what would I call you?" Qin Shi lowered his head and chuckled. "Although there aren't many people in Shenqing school who call me senior martial brother, there are still a few. I want a name that only belongs to you." The intimacy in his words made Mo Chenga's face burn. "What did you say?" Qin she looked down into her eyes and said softly, "Call me husband, okay?" Mo Chinga felt her face was burning. She controlled herself for a long time and finally squeezed out 2 words. "No." Qin she raised his eyebrows, puzzled. "Why?" No means no. This. Although she knew they were husband and wife, she just couldn't say the word husband and wife. It was too intimate. Just once. "Can't I say it?" "No." Mo Chinga turned her head to the side resolutely. No, she couldn't say it. Qin she persisted and turned her head back. "I'm going to enter closed-door meditation and won't see you for several years. You still won't say it?" "No." "You really don't want it?" "I don't want it." She wouldn't let go no matter what, so Qin she could only sigh. "Fine, it's fine if you don't want to say it, but you have to show me something." Seeing that she didn't respond, Qin she continued to stare at her. Mo Chinga clenched her teeth, pulled his head down, and quickly pressed her lips against his. Woo. Before she could finish her sentence, he quickly pulled her back. This time, it wasn't a light touch like a dragonfly touching the water, but a deep kiss with their lips and tongues intertwined. "You." She wanted to say something, but as soon as she opened her mouth, it was blocked. The tip of his tongue slipped between her lips and teeth, entangling her tightly. Her breathing became rapid in an instant. "Don't talk." Qin she whispered between her lips and teeth, then kissed her again. One of his arms wrapped around her waist, pressing her tightly against his body, and the other hand groped around her waist. Mo Chinga knew what he wanted to do. She felt he was too impulsive, but she didn't firmly stop him. Although she had long been prepared to be separated often, they had just gotten married after all. After making the blood oath, they also had skin contact, but that first time was almost a disaster. The 2 of them had lived for half of their lives, but their love affairs were hazy. They only roughly knew how to do it, so how could they know how to enjoy the beauty of skin contact? After that, although they kissed, hugged, and tangled with each other, they were no longer as close as before. Those kisses, hugs, and entanglement actually made them feel good. He finally found his belt, pulled it open, and took off the clothes one by one with ease. "Senior Marshal brother." The moment her back touched the table, Mo Chinga tried her best to prop herself up and said hurriedly, "You should enter closed-door meditation. I told you not to talk." Qin she lowered his head and kissed her again. Her clothes fell from his fingers. Under the cover of the Taoist robe was a woman's soft and graceful curves. Her skin was exposed to the air, but it made her a little uneasy. He noticed her uneasiness, so he held her hand comfortingly and planted a soft kiss on her collarbone. From her gentle collarbone to her delicate shoulders, he finally stopped at her chest. "Senior Marshal brother?" she gasped. This time, Qin she didn't respond. He took off his clothes in confusion and held her waist. Mo Chinga clenched her teeth, but she didn't feel the pain she expected. She was a little confused, but she heard Qin she chuckling. "Concentrate." She didn't have time to think because a huge wave had already submerged them. They didn't know how much time had passed, but the 2 of them gradually calmed down. Qin she sighed and put on his robe. He helped her put her clothes back on first and then fixed his own clothes. When the 2 of them were neatly dressed, he hugged her again reluctantly. "I'm going, and..." Mo Chinga raised her head and looked at him. "Rest assured, I'll always be here." Chapter 311. Inside the cultivation room, Mo Chinga sat cross-legged. The spiritual aura in her dantian was abundant, including a lot of yang spiritual aura. After such a long period of cultivation, the yang spiritual aura had smoothly entered her dantian and merged with her yin spiritual aura, forming a cycle. After forming her gold core, her dantian expanded a lot, which gave space for yin and yang spiritual aura to converge. The yang spiritual aura she obtained from Qin she allowed her art of the origin to be truly displayed, and a real origin appeared in her body. After completing a great circulatory cycle and returning the spiritual aura to her dantian, Mo Chinga stood up and walked out of the cultivation room. Outside the room, the wind blew gently, the bamboo leaves rustled, and Feifei squeaked and pounced on her. Xiaohuo went to cultivate again. In this virtual sky world there were only 2 spiritual beasts. Feifei loved to play, so it waited for Mo Chinga to come out. It was very happy. She smiled and played with Feifei for a while. In the end, she gave it several medicinal pills to appease it and let it play with butterflies by itself. It was strange. Although she let the 2 spiritual beasts eat the spiritual plants in the virtual sky world, they seemed to like medicinal pills more. Perhaps medicinal pills had a better taste? Thinking of this, Mo Chenga couldn't help but smile. She felt a little bored, so she couldn't help but look back at the bamboo house next to her. This was Qinshi's cultivation room. It had been 3 years since he entered closed-door meditation to form his nascent soul. His cultivation room had always been quiet, with only the continuous circulation of spiritual aura. During this time, Mo Chenga understood one thing. People weren't afraid of not being able to get something, but losing it after getting it. In the past, when she was alone and had no worries, she didn't feel anything when she entered closed-door meditation for 5 to 6 years or even more than 10 years. However, after she got used to living with him, she always felt like she was worried about something when she suddenly lost him. Mo Chenga just smiled when she realized this. She didn't feel annoyed at all. In the past, she always worried about what she would do if she got it and lost it later. So she worried about gains and losses. In fact, so what if she lost it? Cherishing the time she got it and slowly adapting to it after losing it, this was a truly free and easy state of mind. If she was afraid of losing it and didn't dare to get it, it would be too tangled and impossible to break through. It had been 3 years. She hadn't reached the middle stage of the core formation realm, but she wasn't far from the peak of the early stage. The benefits she obtained from dual cultivation weren't inferior to Qinshi's. Before she formed her gold core, Qinshi once healed her, so she obtained a portion of his yang spiritual aura and learned what the origin was. After their dual cultivation, yin and yang intersected, allowing her to obtain a lot of yang spiritual energy all at once. The art of the origin was truly activated. She had originally thought that after obtaining the Sunu art of origin, her cultivation speed was already extremely fast. Only after her body had truly formed origin did she realize that this was the true meaning of the art of origin. The 5 elements generated each other, and yin and yang intersected in an endless cycle. Only then did the primal chaos begin and life appear. If it was said that she originally needed to absorb yin spiritual energy from the outside world to increase her cultivation, then now she could use the origin immemorial in her body to create spiritual energy. Of course, the speed at which she produced spiritual energy was not very fast. If she wanted to cultivate normally, she would still need to absorb spiritual energy from the outside world and turn it into her own. However, the ability to produce spiritual energy on her own was unheard of in the current cultivation world. When she absorbed spiritual energy, her body was also producing spiritual energy. This way, her cultivation would always be ahead of others. This was the most heaven-defying thing. But she didn't know whether Qinshi would also be like this after obtaining her yin spiritual energy. Since his art of 3 primordial cycles also required 3 auras to circulate, the principle was similar to her art of the origin, so it should be similar. Thinking up to this point, she cast her gaze towards Qinshi's cultivation room. Although Qinshi hadn't come out yet, based on the spiritual aura movement in the virtual sky world, she knew that his closed-door meditation this time was very smooth. Maybe he could really advance to the nascent soul realm smoothly. It was just that she didn't know how long it would take him. The closed-door meditation time for nascent soul formation was generally longer than for core formation, but it was different for everyone. It could range from 2 to 10 years. Before Qinshi entered closed-door meditation, his spiritual aura was overflowing, so it was reasonable to say that success would come naturally and wouldn't take too long. With this thought in mind, Mo Chenga started to worry again. It's been 3 years, but he still hasn't come out of closed-door meditation. He hasn't even made any movements. Could it be that he encountered some kind of problem? Regardless of whether Qinshi encountered a problem or not, she couldn't think of anything now. She absolutely couldn't disturb him during his soul formation. The only thing she could do was wait outside. At the very least, the spiritual aura inside the virtual sky world was peaceful, so he should be fine now. Mo Chenga continued to live her days of concocting medicinal pills with her eyes open and cultivating with her eyes closed. Cultivating was timeless. In the blink of an eye, another 2 years had passed. One day Mo Chenga, who was cultivating, suddenly opened her eyes. The virtual sky world was connected to her mind. Just now she sensed a sudden big change in the virtual sky world. She stood up, pushed the door open and was immediately stunned. Inside the virtual sky world, the originally very rich spiritual aura condensed into dew-like spiritual beads. Their spiritual light illuminated the entire sky. Countless spiritual beads rushed towards Qinshi's cultivation room, surrounding the bamboo house. The beads sparkled brightly, making the surroundings look as beautiful as a fairyland. Mo Chenga recalled that when martial uncle Shenin formed his nascent soul, this kind of scene also appeared on Clear Spring Peak. She couldn't help but smile. In other words, Qinshi was close to successfully forming his nascent soul. Next, as long as he stabilized his mind and got rid of his inner demon, he could advance to the nascent soul realm. Thinking up to this point, her heart was filled with joy. She secretly prayed that she could pass the final test and successfully advance to the nascent soul realm. He had already failed 3 times and experienced enough setbacks. If he still didn't succeed, it would be too disheartening. Time passed day by day. The spiritual light didn't disperse for several months. During these months, Mo Chinga also stayed outside the cultivation room without leaving for even a moment. At first, Shi's cultivation room only attracted those spiritual beads slowly. Later the speed became faster and faster. Gradually it turned into a huge whirlpool. Inside this whirlpool, countless spiritual beads rushed inside, and the spiritual aura pressure also became stronger and stronger. Mo Chinga felt that she could barely stabilize her mind under this spiritual aura pressure only if she used the soul refining art with all her strength. The stronger the spiritual aura pressure, the happier she felt. She had the soul refining art. Even if Shi was in the peak stage of the core formation realm, he couldn't suppress her with spiritual aura pressure unless he was a nascent soul cultivator. This showed that Shi wasn't far from successfully forming his nascent soul. After an unknown amount of time, Shi gently opened his eyes in the cultivation room. A few short years were like a lifetime to him. This time he finally succeeded in walking out of his inner demon. He smiled and looked down at his hands. He finally succeeded in forming his nascent soul. He stood up, spiritual aura swirling around his body like a flying spiritual bird. His body was full of power, the power to move mountains and drain seas. This was the feeling of forming his nascent soul. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, then opened them again with a smile on his face. He gently pushed the door of the cultivation room open. Their eyes met. A few years of separation was like a lifetime to him. He greedily looked at the person in front of him, not letting go of the slightest subtle expression. He remembered that in the dream of his inner demon, he succeeded in forming his nascent soul. 100 years later, she also entered the nascent soul realm. The two of them held hands and cultivated the path of immortality together. Their names shook the celestial pole and they entered the deification realm together. This time he didn't immerse himself in it for long before he jumped out of it. As long as he opened his eyes, this was their real life. Why would they need an illusion? Mo Chinga didn't speak and neither did Shi. They just walked towards each other naturally and hugged each other quietly. Because of this nascent soul, they were almost separated from each other. Today they finally got what they wanted. Mo Chinga smiled slightly. She hadn't moved from this place for several months. Her voice was a little hoarse. Martial Uncle Shoujing, congratulations on advancing to the nascent soul realm. Shi also smiled. He couldn't help but lower his head and bite her. Martial Uncle N? Isn't that right? Mo Chinga stood on her tiptoes and also bit him. She hugged him with her arms and teased, advancing to the nascent soul realm and becoming a Lord Taoist. From now on you won't be counted in the sect. Martial Uncle Shoujing, you can't run away from the title of an old cow eating cradle grass. Then you can't run away. She hugged her waist, lifted her up and kissed her. Never white hair against red makeup, never afraid of a pear blossom crushing a begonia. After an unknown amount of time, the breathless kiss finally confirmed each other's existence. She held Mo Chinga in his arms and sat directly on the step she was sitting on before. How long have you been waiting outside? Not long. I don't remember. Don't remember? She lowered his head. You really don't remember or you don't want to tell me? Mo Chinga rolled her eyes and smiled. Since you know I don't want to tell you, why did you ask me? All right. She sighed. He knew he couldn't ask her if she didn't want to tell him, so he changed the topic. How long did it take me to form my nascent soul? 5 years. Mo Chinga asked. Did it go smoothly? She nodded happily. Very smoothly. There were almost no twists and turns. However, I spent a lot of time fusing with the Yin spiritual aura, so it took me 5 years. It's good that it went smoothly. Mo Chinga was silent for a while, then suddenly said, At that time I was really afraid that something would go wrong after you broke your gold core. If his gold core broke and he couldn't form his nascent soul, his cultivation level would go down the drain. If he failed to form his gold core he could keep trying, but forming his nascent soul wasn't like that. The risk of failure was too great. During this time she also thought about what would happen if he failed and his cultivation level was damaged. In the end she only strengthened her conviction. The nascent soul was a path cultivators like them who yearned for the great Tao had to take. Even if there was a risk of having their gold core broken and their cultivation destroyed, shouldn't they still try to form their nascent souls? Loving each other didn't mean they had to become timid. Instead, they had to walk on with more courage. How could that be? She stared at her with a faint smile and said softly, I want to walk on the great Tao of immortality with you. He rarely said sweet words, but he had many vows hidden in such words. Chinga smiled and said, rest assured. In 100 years at most, I'll also form my nascent soul. Then we'll form our deification together. 100 years. He stared at her without blinking, but he suddenly smiled and said, 100 years later, you won't be 200 years old yet. Are you so sure you'll become the youngest nascent soul cultivator in the celestial pole? Of course. Chinga said without blushing, I have aptitude that's rarely seen in thousands of years, and I also have fated chances that haven't appeared in tens of thousands of years in the celestial pole. Why can't I become the youngest nascent soul cultivator in the celestial pole? Chapter 3:12. Chinga was very confident that she could advance to the nascent soul realm within 100 years. With her aptitude, the virtual sky world, and now with Qin she was very sure that she could advance to the nascent soul realm within 100 years as long as there were no accidents. Of course, the matter of forming a nascent soul wasn't decided solely by talent. She understood this point, so during these 100 years she definitely had to work hard in her cultivation. After she finished his chores, he asked Chinga, since I've successfully advanced to the nascent soul realm, why weren't there any celestial phenomena when I came out? When she advanced to the nascent soul realm, almost all the spiritual aura in the virtual sky world turned into spiritual beads. But apart from that, there were no thunderstorms or spiritual objects condensed from spiritual aura, so it really didn't look like the advanced stage of the nascent soul realm. Chinga already encountered this problem when she advanced to the nascent soul realm. She said, the virtual sky world is a closed space, so how could there be celestial phenomena? When I advanced to the nascent soul realm, there weren't any celestial phenomena until I came out of the virtual sky world. I see. She asked again, how's the situation outside? Can we go out now? Chinga didn't answer. Instead, she cast a spell to open the sky of the virtual sky world. The sky was red and the ground was black. Demonic Mountain seemed to be a different world compared to before they entered the virtual sky world. Fortunately, the lightning, thunder, and the falling rocks had all stopped. It was just stabilized a year ago, but there are still a lot of drifting restrictions, Chinga said. In the past year, no restrictions have collapsed. That's good. She stared at the outside world and said, in that case we can prepare to go out. Chinga was a little confused. We're going out now? There are still a lot of restrictions outside. She smiled and glanced at her. Have you forgotten? I've advanced to the nascent soul realm now, so these small restrictions are no longer a threat to me. Chinga thought about it and smiled. I haven't gotten used to it yet. Although Demonic Mountain was dangerous for nascent soul cultivators, as long as they didn't go to dangerous places like the depths of Immortal's ruins, there wouldn't be any danger. Originally, the two of them were trapped here. If they wanted to get out, they had to solve a lot of things. Now that she had advanced to the nascent soul realm, those problems were no longer a problem, such as these restrictions and the way to get out. Back then, when Shi and Yihai were trapped on Demonic Mountain, it was Yihai who used all his spiritual aura to help Shi escape. Now that Shi had advanced to the nascent soul realm, he could rely on his own cultivation level to break the restrictions once he left Demonic Mountain. However, when they thought back to such peaceful days, both of them felt reluctant to part. Several days later, the two of them finished preparing everything and came out of the virtual sky world. As soon as she left the virtual sky world, she felt the fierce gales. Shi frowned. With a wave of his sleeve, a wisp of spiritual aura surged up, blocking the gales outside. Then he got on the flying cloud and headed towards Immortal's ruins together. Along the way, the two of them saw a lot of skeletons. Some of them even had Chenkuan bags, magic weapons, and other things scattered around them. Chinga didn't hesitate to put them all into her bag. She didn't find any strange things on this trip to Demonic Mountain, but her harvest wasn't small. 10 years ago, before they escaped into the virtual sky world, the two of them picked up a lot of things. Moreover, this time many cultivators were involved in the restrictions and died here. Now that the restrictions were stable, these people's belongings became theirs again. Watching Chinga happily picking up the scattered Chenkuan bags, she couldn't help but find it funny. You have a unique treasure like the virtual sky world, and you usually have the support of the sect, so you don't lack spirit stones, do you? Why do you still like picking up things so much? Mo Chenga said confidently, you've never lacked spirit stones, so of course you don't know the pain of lacking spirit stones. The things are right in front of me, so it'd be a waste not to pick them up. When she wandered around with second uncle, she wished she could split one spirit stone into two. This kind of pain of lacking spirit stones had always been engraved in her heart, so it was impossible for her to turn a blind eye to these Chenkuan bags. As they walked and picked up things, the two of them slowly headed towards Immortal's ruins. After the previous earthquake, the scenery of Demonic Mountain changed completely, so it took them a long time to find the right way. Fortunately, tens of thousands of feet peak was split in two during the collapse of the restrictions, so they could directly fly over the remaining height without having to be as careful as when they came. When they arrived at tens of thousands of feet peak and returned to Immortal's ruins, Mo Chenga asked, Senior Marshal Brother, is there any danger in breaking the restrictions here? They were trapped in the virtual sky world, and the entrance to Demonic Mountain had long been closed. If they wanted to go out, they could only go through the place Qin discovered. Back then, in order to break the restrictions, Qin used the secret technique of the art of 3 primordial cycles to temporarily raise his cultivation level to the nascent soul realm. After he went out, his vitality was greatly damaged, and his cultivation level directly fell back to the aura refining realm. It took him more than 10 years to recover his vitality. Qin knew what she was worried about, so he said with a smile, Don't worry, the process of breaking the restrictions isn't dangerous. I'm a real nascent soul cultivator now, so I won't get hurt. Mo Chenga was a little relieved. He had just advanced to the nascent soul realm and hadn't stabilized his realm yet. If he got hurt again, he wouldn't be the same as before he formed his nascent soul. Let's go this way. After searching for a while, they finally found the right place. Qin pulled her and flew towards the restrictions. It had been 10 years since the last time Demonic Mountain opened, but the turbulence it caused still hadn't subsided. Demonic Mountain had existed in the celestial pole for millions of years since ancient times. There were also records of exploration for more than 100,000 years. Countless people had died there, but there had never been so many deaths. More than 90 years ago, the last time Demonic Mountain opened, the great restrictions collapsed and many cultivators died inside. At that time, the whole celestial pole was in an uproar, calling it a disaster that hadn't happened in thousands of years. But no one expected that the next time Demonic Mountain opened, there would be even more deaths. Except for those who left in advance, all the aura refining and foundation building cultivators died on Demonic Mountain. None of them escaped. The core formation cultivators fared better, but only 20 to 30% of them escaped. Even half of the nascent soul cultivators died inside. Of course, the collapse of the restrictions wasn't the main reason why the nascent soul cultivators died. The reason why so many nascent soul cultivators died was because they fought fiercely in Jade Palace. It was just that ordinary cultivators, even ordinary disciples of big sects, didn't know this reason. Ordinary cultivators only knew that the last time Demonic Mountain opened, more than 30 nascent soul cultivators entered one after another, but less than 20 of them came out alive. Among them, there were more than 10 nascent soul cultivators who died, and 5 or 6 of them were from the 7 great cultivation groups. This number shocked the celestial pole. Even Tiandao sect, the number 1 cultivation group in the celestial pole, only had 7 nascent soul cultivators. In that case, it was equivalent to each of the 7 great cultivation groups losing 1 nascent soul cultivator. Among the 7 great cultivation groups, it took several hundred years for each of them to produce a nascent soul cultivator. This kind of loss was more serious than any demonic beast. In the past 10 years, almost all the cultivators in the celestial pole side with emotion. 70 years ago, they experienced a rarely seen demonic beast riot, and now they also experienced 2 riots on Demonic Mountain. The cultivation level of the celestial pole would most likely take several hundred years to recover. Chapter 313. This year, it was time for Tiandao sect to hold the Immortals Assembly again. Mount Yuheng was bustling with people coming and going. 10 years ago, Tiandao sect lost a nascent soul cultivator and several core formation cultivators on Demonic Mountain, as well as a large number of low-level disciples. Tiandao sect's strength was greatly reduced, and its reputation as the number 1 sect in the celestial pole was in danger. Because of this, the higher-ups of Tiandao sect made a prompt decision to open the mountain gate and recruit disciples. In the past, Although this decision couldn't immediately solve the problem of the decline in strength, Tiandao sect would slowly recover its strength after more than 100 years and still hold the position of the number one sect in the celestial pole. But more than 70 years ago, after the demonic beast riot, all the cultivation sects had just recovered their vitality. Then they suffered a great disaster and opened their mountain gates one after another. In the past it was difficult to enter the mountain gate with many disciples, but now, it immediately became a situation where all the sects fought for disciples. Although Tiandao sect was known as the number one sect, its reputation had declined, and it couldn't guarantee that it would get enough outstanding disciples in this situation. Because of this, Master Taoist Yanglin, the new sect head of Tiandao sect, almost had his hair turn white from worry. Although he was the sect leader, he still had to answer to the nascent Soul Grand Supreme Elders, and he also had to deal with the power struggle. If he couldn't solve this problem, the nascent Soul Grand Supreme Elders might be unhappy, and the position of sect leader would be changed. Although the position of sect head was a punching bag, it was very important to the interests of his family, so he couldn't quit it even if he wanted to. Thinking of this, Master Taoist Yanglin somewhat envied those cultivators who cultivated hard. Although they didn't have the support of their families and cultivated hard, they could wholeheartedly devote themselves to cultivation without paying attention to these mundane things. This was also a blessing. However, although Tiandao sect wasn't as powerful as before, it was still much better than those small and medium-sized cultivation sections. As soon as the Immortals Assembly was announced, countless low-level cultivators suddenly rushed to Mount Yuhan. He only hoped that among these low-level cultivators, there would be a few disciples with outstanding talents. That way he could explain to the Grand Supreme Elders. On Mount Yuhan, among the low-level cultivators waiting for the Immortals Assembly, someone shouted, "Wu Laosen, why are you here?" The person who was called was a cultivator in his 30s with a pale face and a short beard. His cultivation level was only in the 7th layer of the aura refining realm. If it was in the past, with this kind of cultivation he wouldn't even need to think about participating in the Tiandao sect's Immortals Assembly. He could only try his luck at a small cultivation sect. It just so happened that they came at a good time. In the past 10 years, Tiandao sect held an Immortals Assembly almost every year, and many disciples in the 7th layer of the aura refining realm were able to join the sect. The man called Wu Laosen turned his head and looked at the lean man who called him. He curled his lips and said, "If you Li Xiang can come, why can't I Wu Sandy come?" This situation was not uncommon in the Immortals Assembly in recent years. Originally, if the Immortals Assembly was held every 3 or 10 years, a large number of young cultivators from all over the world would gather at that time. Most of them didn't know each other. However, since it was held every year, the number of cultivators participating in the Immortals Assembly was limited. Naturally, there would be a lot of acquaintances. The lean man named Li Xiang grinned when he heard Wu Sandy's words. He put his hand on Wu Sandy's shoulder and said, "Wu Laosen, we've known each other since childhood. I'm just saying hello. I don't mean anything else. Don't misunderstand." Misunderstand? Wu Sandy cast a glance at Li Xiang and said disdainfully, "Forget it. If Li Xiang's words can be trusted, the sun will rise from the west." Hey, what do you mean by that? Li Xiang patted his shoulder hard. "Let's forget about the past. We're old acquaintances. It must be fate that brought us together to meet in this Immortals Assembly. Come. Let's have a chat. Who knows, we might even be able to give each other some advice." Wu Sandy looked at him suspiciously for a while, but he was eventually persuaded. Right, they were all here to participate in the Immortals Assembly. Although they had conflicts since childhood, they didn't hate each other. It would be good to have a chat. Thereupon, the two of them found a corner and began to talk about the Immortals Assembly. They talked about cultivation and exchanged information. They were both in the 7th layer of the aura refining realm. In the past, they really wouldn't have had the chance to enter a big sect like Tiandao sect. They couldn't let go of such an opportunity. Who knew when Tiandao sect would receive enough disciples, and it wouldn't be as easy to enter as it was now. After they finished talking about what they heard, Li Xiang still wanted to continue. He asked, "Wu Laosen, all 7 great cultivation groups are recruiting disciples. Why did you also come to Tiandao sect?" Wu Sandy stroked his mustache and snorted. "What other reason could there be? It's close. Besides, Tiandao sect is known as the number 1 cultivation group, so it's better than other cultivation groups." No. Li Xiang shook his hand and said, "Wu Laosen, you're wrong." "Wrong?" Wu Sandy glared at him. "What's wrong? Among the 7 great cultivation groups, there's no need to mention Danding School. It suffered heavy losses 70 years ago, so it's only a medium-sized cultivation group now. Lingshou sect specializes in beast taming techniques, so ordinary cultivators like us who don't have talent in beast taming would find it hard to enter. As for Zhengfa sect, it specializes in water techniques, but we don't have water spiritual roots. As for Biyun sect, I'm not a female cultivator, so their requirements for male cultivators are much higher. Gujian sect isn't bad, but it's a sword cultivation group, so it won't be easy for them to cultivate again. In this case, the remaining ones are Xianqing School and Tiandao sect. Although Xianqing School isn't bad, it's still a bit inferior to Tiandao sect. Wrong. Li Xiang made 3 mistakes in a row and interrupted Wu Sandy. He squinted at him and said, "When it comes to cultivation, I, Li Xiang, may not be as good as you, but when it comes to these things, you can't see them as clearly as I can." Although Wu Sandy wasn't convinced, Li Xiang admitted that his cultivation wasn't as good as his, which made him feel very comfortable, so he didn't care about such a trivial matter as being interrupted. But he still felt he was right. "What's wrong? Why don't you tell me?" "In fact, what you said before was correct. Danding School and Lingshou sect are either too weak or they're not suitable for us. But you said Xianqing School is a bit weaker than Tiandao sect, so you're wrong." "Why?" Wu Sandy glared at him and said, "Xianqing School has always been a bit weaker than Tiandao sect. Although Tiandao sect lost 1 nascent soul cultivator 10 years ago, they still have 6, and 2 of them are in the late stage of the nascent soul realm. Xianqing School only has 1 late-stage nascent soul cultivator. Although no nascent soul cultivator died 10 years ago and there are still 5 of them now, 1 late-stage nascent soul cultivator is equivalent to several early-stage nascent soul cultivators. This strength is obvious at a glance." "You've only seen a little bit on the surface," Li Xiang said proudly. "Yes, the strength of nascent soul cultivators in Tiandao sect is indeed a bit stronger than that of Xianqing School, but have you thought about what will happen in the next several hundred years?" Wu Sandy looked at him suspiciously. "What? Do you want to say that many Xianqing School cultivators will advance to the nascent soul realm? But Tiandao sect also has many talented disciples. How can it be worse than Xianqing School? It's not bad. This was Tiandao sect after all." Li Xiang's loud discussion seemed to indicate that Tiandao sect was inferior to Xianqing School, which had long attracted other people's attention. Those who came to participate in Tiandao sect's Immortals Assembly all had a good impression of Tiandao sect, so their gazes were already filled with hostility when they heard Li Xiang's words. Li Xiang was a slippery person, so he naturally noticed this. He said unhurriedly, "When did I say Tiandao sect was inferior to Xianqing School? What I said was, it's still too early for you to think Xianqing School lost to Tiandao sect. Yes, Tiandao sect is a bit stronger in terms of nascent soul cultivators, but the development of a sect doesn't only rely on nascent soul cultivators, but also on thousands of low-level disciples. The people around them were all low-level aura-refining cultivators who wanted to enter the sect." Hearing this made them feel comfortable and less hostile towards Li Xiang. Li Xiang continued, "Have you ever thought about how many low-level disciples Tiandao sect lost during the demonic beast riot and the 2 disasters on Demonic Mountain? The number of disciples in the aura-refining and foundation-building realms was at least 1,000. Also, there were 7 or 8 core formation cultivators. So this is why Tiandao sect is stronger than Xianqing School. It has thousands more aura-refining disciples, 100 more foundation-building disciples, and almost 10 more core formation cultivators. It's because it has more low-level disciples that it has more potential. Tiandao sect always has 1 or 2 more nascent soul cultivators than Xianqing School." These words attracted the attention of the low-level cultivators around them. Many people gathered around them, and those who didn't also pricked up their ears to listen. Li Xiang became even more proud and said loudly, "But do you know that Xianqing School didn't lose any aura-refining disciples during the demonic beast riot? Also, during the 2 disasters on Demonic Mountain, few low-level disciples participated because it was too far away from Demonic Mountain. In this way, Xianqing School's number of aura-refining disciples to core formation cultivators isn't worse than Tiandao sect at all, maybe even a bit more." At this point, someone interjected, "Fellow Taoist, how do you know about these things? You're not a sect disciple, so how do you know the number of disciples in a big sect?" Li Xiang glanced at the cultivator who raised the question, raised his head and said, "Brother, you don't care about these things, so of course you don't know. No matter how big a sect is, it doesn't have more than 10,000 people. Small cultivators like us can't know the exact number of cultivators, but we can estimate it. Someone in the crowd said, "Yes, fellow Taoist is right. This isn't a top secret. We can estimate the number of disciples these big sects accept every year." "Yes, yes," someone echoed. Li Xiang was extremely happy and said, "Fellow Taoist is right. We estimate it from the number of disciples they accept." "Enough, enough." Someone couldn't bear his proud manner and said, "If you have something to say, just say it. What's the point of talking about this?" Although the words weren't polite, they were waiting to hear it, so Li Xiang didn't get angry. He continued to say, "Okay, let's continue talking about business. In terms of the number of low-level disciples, Xianqing school isn't worse than Tiandao sect, so in terms of potential, it can also be said to be equal. But there's one more thing. I don't know if you've noticed, but Xianqing school has suffered very little or no losses in these events. This is very important for a disciple's cultivation mentality. With this in mind, I'm afraid the potential of Xianqing school's low-level disciples will surpass that of Tiandao sect." Li Xiang looked around and saw that all the cultivators were silent and didn't object to his opinion, so he continued to say, "Then what's Xianqing school's disadvantage now? Even its nascent soul cultivators are still suppressed by Tiandao sect. Most of Tiandao sect's nascent soul cultivators are facing death, while Xianqing school's strength isn't as good as Tiandao sect's, but most of their lifespans haven't passed the halfway mark. Considering this, I don't think I need to say whose future is better, right? I dare say that in the next 100 years, if Xianqing school is the first to produce a nascent soul cultivator, their momentum will flourish, and the title of the #1 sect in the celestial pole will be theirs." The crowd was silent. After a while, someone said sarcastically, "Since that's the case, why doesn't this fellow Taoist go to Xianqing school? He even came to participate in Tiandao sect's Immortals Assembly." That person was obviously a supporter of Tiandao sect. Li Xiang didn't get angry. He smiled and said, "Brother, you haven't been to Xianqing school, right? I'm telling you, Xianqing school didn't lose many low-level disciples. They've recovered their strength in recent years. Although they've also opened their gates in the past few years, they've been recruiting disciples just as strictly. I, Li Xiang, am a little clever, but when it comes to cultivation, I'm not worth mentioning. I really don't have the confidence." That person sneered again. "Are you so sure that Xianqing school will produce a nascent soul cultivator first? Maybe it'll be Tiandao sect. At that time they'll still have more nascent soul cultivators than Xianqing school, and they'll also be stronger than them. They won't be able to snatch the #1 sect in the celestial pole no matter what." "I didn't say Xianqing school would be the first," Li Xiang said innocently. "I'm just analyzing what might happen. I've always said it might happen. Everyone heard it, right?" The onlookers nodded. What he said was indeed possible. But although it was only a possibility, Li Xiang's analysis was very reasonable. Among the onlookers, some people who were quite confident in their cultivation level thought that if Xianqing school really didn't lower their conditions for recruiting disciples, it meant that they were very confident. Should they go to Xianqing school to try it out first? Seeing that the onlookers all agreed with Li Xiang, the person was annoyed and said angrily, "Just wait. Tiandao sect will definitely produce a nascent soul cultivator first. At that time Xianqing school will still be the second." Li Xiang smiled and said, "Brother, this kind of thing is really hard to say. It might be Tiandao sect or Xianqing school. But in the end it's their big sect's business. We little cultivators can just chat when we have nothing to do. After all, we haven't even entered a sect yet." "Yes, yes." In front of outsiders, Wu Sandy also stood on Li Xiang's side. "We're just chatting. Fellow Taoist, you don't need to be excited, you don't need to be excited." At this point, a sudden clap of thunder was heard. The sky suddenly flashed with dazzling golden light, the wind and clouds surged, and the thunder rumbled endlessly. All the cultivators looked up and saw countless spiritual lights flashing in the sky. Among them, spiritual birds were flying and auspicious clouds were surging. A strong spiritual aura pressure shrouded them. The spiritual aura of the little cultivators suddenly became chaotic, making it hard for them to breathe. Some people with weaker cultivation levels even vomited blood and knelt down. The crowd began to stir. Someone shouted, "What's wrong? What's that?" Then a knowledgeable person shouted, "Celestial phenomenon. It's celestial phenomenon." Someone formed his nascent soul. The cultivators who heard Li Xiang's discussion were secretly surprised. Someone from Tiandao sect formed his nascent soul again? It seemed Xianqing school really couldn't become the #1 sect. Li Xiang and Wu Sandy glanced at each other with bitterness in their eyes. It couldn't be such a coincidence, right? Then didn't they work for nothing? But this was indeed the celestial phenomenon of nascent soul formation. In the sky, the golden light became more and more dazzling and gradually dyed the auspicious clouds red like fire. The auspicious clouds surged and slowly formed a shape, a pair of wings spread, tail feathers raised, and a clear cry. A divine beast phoenix. Chapter 3:14. Before Taoist Master Yanglin could finish sighing, he saw the celestial phenomena of nascent soul formation all over the sky, and he was so shocked that his jaw almost dropped. Just as he was wondering why no one in the sect was doing closed-door meditation to form his nascent soul, he received a summon from the head Grand Supreme Elder. He had no choice but to hurriedly order his disciples to inquire about it, and then he went to see the head Grand Supreme Elder first. Greetings, Supreme Elders. As soon as he entered the abode of the head Grand Supreme Elder Lu Dingyuan, he was stared at by 4 nascent soul elders, causing Taoist Master Yanglin to tremble with fear. There were 4 nascent soul elders, and one of them was a late-stage nascent soul cultivator. Even if they didn't deliberately release their spiritual aura, a middle-stage core formation cultivator like him would find it hard to remain calm and collected. The Tiandao sect originally had 7 nascent soul elders. One of them died 10 years ago during the extraterrestrial demon war, and another was seriously injured and was now in seclusion. Of the remaining 5, only one wasn't present. It seemed that the appearance of the nascent soul celestial phenomenon had shocked the higher-ups of the Tiandao sect. "Dispense with the formalities," said Grand Elder Lu Dingyuan, who sat in the seat of honor. He looked young, no more than 30 years old. He had a 3-inch beard and wore a Taoist crown and a Taoist robe. He looked like an immortal. But these were just appearances. Perfected Master Yanglin knew that this head Supreme Elder actually cultivated in devil arts. He was kind when he was in a good mood, but if he was in a bad mood he would be very irritable. Therefore, although Master Taoist Yanglin said that there was no need for formalities, he still bowed respectfully and asked, "May I know what instructions Grand Supreme Elders have for me? Do I still need to instruct you?" Among the 4 nascent soul elders, Fairy Fengqing, the one with the most fiery temper, spoke up. She glanced outside, her phoenix eyes slanting. "Such a big movement. As the sect leader, you shouldn't be unaware, right?" Of course, Immortal Yanglin knew the reason, but he just asked out of politeness. He didn't expect to get it wrong again, so he could only answer with a bitter face, "I don't know either. There are a total of 5 senior martial brothers and sisters in the late stage of core formation in our sect. 2 of them are close to the peak stage of core formation. But these 2 senior martial brothers haven't said anything about forming their nascent souls. Disciple was just thinking about who is forming their nascent souls, so I only had time to send someone to inquire." Hearing those words, the 4 nascent soul realm elders looked at each other. Of course they knew about these things. It was just that there were some things that the sect leader knew more about, so they summoned him to ask. "Grand Supreme Elders," Taoist Yanglin mustered up his courage and said, "Disciple discovered that the celestial phenomenon appeared in the North Peak. The North Peak is connected to Demonic Mountain, and there's no Immortal's Cave there at all. So Disciple boldly guessed that the celestial phenomenon isn't from our sect, or there's some secret behind it." After all, he was the sect leader. His words were quite insightful. Hearing this, the 4 nascent soul elders looked at Lu Dingyuan, the late nascent soul cultivator. Stroking his beard, Lu Dingyuan replied, "That's possible. Everyone knows the situation of the core formation cultivators in our sect. It's not a good time for them to form their nascent soul, yet the celestial phenomenon appeared in the North Mountain. In my opinion, it's most likely not a cultivator from our sect." "Senior Martial Brother Lu," Fairy Fengqing said with a frown, "who dares to form their nascent soul on the territory of my Tiandao sect?" He was too daring. No matter what, we're the #1 sect in the celestial pole. There are so many nascent soul cultivators in our sect, and we also have Senior Martial Brother Lu and Senior Martial Brother Bian. How dare he? Lu Dingyuan shook his head. "We'll know what's going on soon. There's no need to be anxious." After a long period of silence, the astronomical phenomenon still hadn't disappeared. The spiritual energy in the sky was even becoming more and more abundant. Dazzling golden light danced in the air. Suddenly, Fairy Fengqing exclaimed and stood up abruptly in surprise. "Senior brothers, look." The other 3 nascent soul realm cultivators looked up at the same time and saw the auspicious clouds on the horizon forming the shape of a phoenix. Then he heard a clear cry like the cry of a phoenix. "Phoenix celestial phenomenon. Lu Dingyuan also couldn't sit still. When cultivators formed their nascent souls, celestial phenomena would appear, and the auspicious clouds inside the celestial phenomena would take the shape of various spiritual beasts. When he formed his nascent soul, what appeared was a bishi, and at that time, it already shook East Kunwu. Swan and I was one of the 9 sons of the dragon, the descendant of a divine beast. Sure enough, he successfully cultivated to the late stage of nascent soul. The phoenix celestial phenomenon actually appeared on this young man? What did this mean? The phoenix was a true divine beast. Lu Dingyuan made a prompt decision and immediately sent out a teleportation talisman. After a while, the teleportation talisman returned. After he put it away, his expression suddenly changed. Senior Martial Brother Lu? Fairy Fengqing asked. After a while, Lu Dingyuan's expression slowly calmed down. He stood up and said, "Your senior martial brother Bayan already knows what's going on, so he's on his way." He glanced at his 3 junior martial brothers and sisters, who were all only in the early stage of the nascent soul realm. He sighed and said, "It's Xianqing School's Qin Shoujing. He's forming his nascent soul on Demonic Mountain and just broke the restriction." What? The 3 nascent soul cultivators were still confused, but Master Taoist Yanglin's expression changed first. After all, there was a difference in realm. No matter how talented a core formation cultivator was, nascent soul cultivators wouldn't pay much attention to him. Therefore, the 3 nascent soul elders weren't too familiar with Qin Shoujing's name, but Master Taoist Yanglin was very clear about it. Upon seeing the 3 nascent soul elders' questioning gazes, Master Taoist Yanglin calmed down and explained, "Martial uncles, you probably don't know, but Qin Shoujing is the disciple of Lord Taoist Jinghe of Xianqing School. He's known as a genius. He formed his gold core 78 at that time and shook the celestial pole." "Oh, so it's him." One of the nascent soul cultivators said, "Senior Martial Brother Lu said a few years ago that our core formation disciples were a bit worse than Xianqing schools. Qin Shoujing was one of them, right?" Lu Dingyuan frowned and said in a deep voice, "You don't know much, so you don't know. A few years ago, I heard he tried to form his nascent soul, so I kept this matter in mind. He failed to form his nascent soul 3 times in the past, so he came to Demonic Mountain. Later, he disappeared without a trace on Demonic Mountain. I even thought he'd already perished inside, but I didn't expect he actually came out alive and even formed his nascent soul." Master Taoist Yanglin reported, "Martial Uncle Lu, more than 90 years ago, Qin Shoujing also went to Demonic Mountain and came out more than 10 years after the restriction was closed. Presumably, he knew some secrets on Demonic Mountain, so he could escape every time." "I see." Lu Dingyuan pondered for a moment, then shook his head and sighed. "It's really fate. I originally thought heaven blessed Tiandao sect and let Qin Shoujing die on Demonic Mountain. I didn't expect that in the end we still lost to Xianqing School. Alas." Fairy Fengqing's expression turned fierce. She said, "Senior Martial Brother Lu, since he just happened to appear in Tiandao sect, why don't we just kill him on the spot?" Lu Dingyuan shook his head. "Junior Martial Sister Fengqing, sometimes killing people can't solve problems. Qin Jinghe must have Qin Shoujing's natal lamp. How could Qin Jinghe not know he's alive? Besides, Qin Shoujing's appearance was so big that the news couldn't be hidden. If he died in Tiandao sect, how could Xianqing School let us go? Now is the time for Tiandao sect to recuperate, not to fight. Even if the title of the #1 sect in the celestial pole is taken away, we can still get it back, but we can't afford to lose our disciples." "What Senior Martial Brother Lu said makes sense," an early-stage nascent soul cultivator said. An early-stage nascent soul cultivator said, "We have Senior Martial Brother Lu and Senior Martial Brother Bayan, so Tiandao sect's power is still there. We don't need to be impatient." Fairy Fengqing wanted to say something, but Lu Dingyuan raised his hand and stopped her. "They're here." At that moment, the celestial phenomenon gradually ended. Several flight lights flew over from the north peak of Mount Yuheng and stopped in front of Lu Dingyuan's Immortal's Cave. They were Lord Taoist Bayan, another late-stage nascent soul cultivator from Tiandao sect, Qin Shi and Mo Tiange. In an instant, a smile appeared on Lu Dingyuan's face. He led his 3 nascent soul martial siblings and a group of disciples to welcome them. "So it's fellow Taoist Shoujing, Brother Taoist Jinghe's beloved disciple. It's an honor to meet you." In any case, Qin Shi had just advanced to the nascent soul realm. A late-stage nascent soul cultivator treating him with such courtesy could be considered giving him enough face, so he also politely returned the salute with Mo Tiange. I don't dare." Greetings, senior martial brothers and sisters of Tiandao sect. I had no choice but to form my nascent soul on Demonic Mountain. If I disturbed you, please forgive me. Haha, you're too kind. Lu Dingyuan felt a bit more comfortable when he heard Qin Shi calling himself a brat but actually calling himself a junior humbly. He said, "This is also a fated chance. Fellow Taoist Shoujing, please come in and have a seat." Qin Shi smiled, gave Emo Chenga a meaningful look and followed Lu Dingyuan into his immortal's cave. Emo Chenga understood what he meant. Since Tiandao sect was treating them with courtesy, there shouldn't be any danger, so they could go in boldly without worry. After they entered Lu Dingyuan's immortal's cave, Lu Dingyuan introduced the nascent soul cultivators present to Qin Shi one by one. After greeting them, he saw Emo Chenga following behind Qin Shi, so he asked, "This is?" Qin Shi smiled and said, "This is my junior martial sister and also my Dao companion. Her Taoist name is Qingwei." Oh. Lu Dingyuan was a bit surprised. Although most nascent soul male cultivators took core formation female cultivators as their Dao companions, Emo Chenga's cultivation level was indeed a bit low. But in the end, this was other people's business, so Lu Dingyuan just smiled and didn't say much. He just glanced at his disciples and told them to treat Emo Chenga with the same courtesy. Everyone sat down and served tea. Lu Dingyuan said, "Fellow Taoist Shoujing, not only did you escape from death this time, but you also formed your nascent soul. You must have a lot of stories, right? Can you tell us?" Qin Shi smiled. "I was just lucky. 10 years ago, when the restrictions on Demonic Mountain collapsed, my junior martial sister and I happened to not be affected, but we were trapped inside and couldn't get out. During these 10 years, Demonic Mountain was extremely unstable, so we had to find a safe place to do closed-door meditation. Fortunately, I obtained some treasures inside and successfully formed my nascent soul, which allowed me to escape." Really? When the restrictions on Demonic Mountain collapsed, only a few people escaped. Fellow Taoist Shoujing was really lucky. Lu Dingyuan obviously didn't believe him, and Qin Shi also didn't intend to make him believe him. This kind of thing was tacit. Therefore he just smiled and asked, "Senior Martial Brother Lu, we've been trapped in Demonic Mountain all these years. May I know the situation in Kunwu now? How many people escaped? Is my master, Lord Taoist Jinghe, doing well?" "Fellow Taoist Shoujing, rest assured." Lu Dingyuan answered with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Jinghe was really lucky. He escaped with fellow Taoist Huayan from your group, and he only suffered minor injuries. On the other hand, I heard fellow Taoist Huayan was seriously injured. I don't know how he's been these years." "Oh, thank you for telling me, Senior Martial Brother Lu." Upon hearing this news, both Qin Shi and Emo Chenga breathed sighs of relief. At least they were still alive. Chapter 315. They only stayed in Tiandao sect for one day. On the second day, Emo Chenga and Qin Shi went back to Xianqing school. What they found interesting was that Xianqing school sent 2 disciples to Tiandao sect's Immortals Assembly to fan the flames, trying to persuade some cultivators with good aptitudes to go to Xianqing school. Coincidentally, when they talked about which of Tiandao sect or Xianqing school would have a nascent soul cultivator, they broke the restriction on Demonic Mountain and triggered the nascent soul celestial phenomenon, making the 2 disciples think that Tiandao sect just happened to have a nascent soul cultivator and fell short of success. Soon the truth spread like wildfire. After learning that it was Xianqing school cultivators who triggered the nascent soul celestial phenomenon, a group of cultivators withdrew from Tiandao sect's Immortals Assembly and wanted to go to Xianqing school to try their luck. The 2 disciples were overjoyed and soon contacted them. Since they were Xianqing school disciples and had a heavy responsibility, they didn't refuse and took the 2 foundation building disciples with them. If they flew back to Xianqing school on their own, it would probably take them several months. The appearance of the nascent soul celestial phenomenon saved them a lot of time and effort, and they directly completed their task. The 2 disciples were extremely grateful to Qin Shi, and they were also very curious about Emo Chenga. Qin Shi had a cold personality and was now a nascent soul cultivator, so the 2 disciples didn't dare to ask too many questions. Seeing that Emo Chenga was quite kind, they surrounded her and asked all sorts of questions, calling her martial uncle very affectionately. After being trapped on Demonic Mountain for 10 years, Emo Chenga also wanted to inquire about the outside world, so she chatted with the 2 foundation building disciples along the way. "Martial Uncle Qingwei, I heard you formed your gold core before you were 100 years old. You're really amazing. We've heard about you before, but we never had the chance to meet you. Now that we can meet you, we're really lucky." The foundation-building disciple named Li Yang's mouth seemed to be smeared with honey, and he could flatter her easily. Of course, Mo Tiange didn't take his words seriously. She just thought it was quite interesting, so she said with a smile, "Are you too specialized in carrying out a glib talk mission? He's very eloquent." Another disciple named Wu De felt a bit ashamed when he heard that. He said, "Martial Uncle Qingwei, please don't mind him. We often go to other cultivation groups to spread some news. This brat is used to it, so compliments come out of his mouth easily. He didn't mean to offend you." As he said that, he glared at Li Yang. "Martial Uncle is one of us, so don't talk like that." Li Yang rubbed his head and revealed an embarrassed smile. "Martial Uncle Qingwei, although disciples' words are compliments, they're all true. You and Martial Uncle Shou Jing. Oh no, Martial Ancestor Shou Jing, are legends in the sect. We've been looking forward to meeting you for a long time, but unfortunately, you two are elusive. It's difficult to meet you even if we wanted to." That was the truth. There was no need to mention Qin Shi. He rarely appeared in front of people. Even among the disciples who had been in the school for several decades, very few people had seen him. Mo Tiange also rarely went out. Aside from the time she took care of secular affairs for Lord Daoist Jinghe more than 60 years ago, she often went back and forth between peaks to handle affairs. In the past few decades, she was either traveling outside or cultivating in closed-door meditation. Mo Tiange smiled and changed the topic. "You two work for the Steward's Hall, so you must be well informed. May I know how our sect has been in the past 10 years? Our sect's situation?" Wu De thought for a moment, then answered, "Martial Uncle, do you want to ask about our current strength and reputation? It's very good. Speaking of which, it's fortunate that we're far away from Demonic Mountain in western Kunwu. Every time Demonic Mountain opens, although several core formation martial uncles and nascent soul grandmasters go there, disciples below the foundation building realm rarely participate, so our losses aren't great. 10 years ago, when Demonic Mountain's great restriction collapsed, we only lost 2 core formation martial uncles and several foundation building cultivators, which is much better than other cultivation groups." Mo Tiange had already learned from Tiandao sect that her master and martial uncle Huayan were fine, but she still asked again, "Are the 2 nascent soul grandmasters okay?" Li Yang answered first, "Don't worry, martial uncle. The 2 nascent soul grandmasters escaped in time, but they were both slightly injured." Mo Tiange and Qin Shi were mentally prepared for this, so they didn't take it seriously and just asked, "Are they okay now?" Unexpectedly, Li Yang asked, "Martial uncle, did the people of Tiandao sect tell you that Grandmaster Jinghe was slightly injured and Grandmaster Huayan was seriously injured?" "Yes." Mo Tiange raised her eyebrows and looked at Qin Shi. From what he said, could it be that the information was inaccurate? Wu De sighed and said, "Martial Uncle Qingwei, Grandmaster Shoujing, those words were actually released for others to hear, but the truth isn't like that. Grandmaster Huayan's injuries weren't that serious. Not only was his life not in danger, but he also didn't lose his cultivation level. I reckon he's recovered after 10 years of healing." Mo Tiange raised her eyebrows and asked, "What about Grandmaster Jinghe? Is he okay?" Sure enough, Wu De continued to say, "Grandmaster Jinghe's situation isn't good. In fact, Grandmaster Jinghe tried his best to escape from Demonic Mountain with Grandmaster Huayan. Before we left, we heard that Grandmaster Jinghe was still in closed-door meditation to heal his injuries. I don't know how he's doing." Mo Tiange and Qin Shi exchanged a look and frowned, lost in thought. It turned out that the one who was seriously injured was their master, and the information circulating outside was false. This wasn't difficult to understand. Although Xianqing School had 6 nascent soul cultivators, there was only 1 in the late stage and 1 in the middle stage. Lord Daoist Jinghe's cultivation level was in the peak of the middle stage of the nascent soul realm, and his fighting strength wasn't inferior to that of a cultivator in the late stage. Needless to say, the existence of such a Lord Daoist meant to Xianqing School. With the loss of Tiandao sect's strength and Xianqing School possibly becoming the #1 sect in the celestial pole, this news was naturally concealed. Thinking up to this point, the two of them couldn't help but worry. Master was in the peak of the middle stage of the nascent soul realm now, but he was seriously injured. Would he be unable to advance to the late stage of the nascent soul realm because of this? Wu De and Li Yang were observing their expressions. Upon seeing the worried expressions on their faces, they immediately said, "Martial Uncle and Grandmaster don't need to worry too much. Although we can be considered core disciples of our school, we're only 2 small foundation building cultivators. If Grandmaster Jinghe's life is really in danger, It'll be top secret information, and he won't let us know about it. That's right. Clear Spring Peak has been prosperous these years. I heard Grandmaster Jingha occasionally receives disciples, so it's obviously nothing serious. After thinking for a while, Qin Shi nodded and finally said, "What you said is reasonable." Wu Da and Li Yang were overjoyed to be praised by a nascent soul grandmaster, so they complimented Qin Shi again. Mo Chenga was worried but also felt it was funny. Putting aside the matter about Lord Daoist Jingha for the time being, Mo Chenga asked, "Since you know so much about the school, do you know a foundation-building disciple named Yijinji?" Yijinji? Li Yang asked, "Martial uncle, are you talking about Grandmaster Shoujing's inner disciple, your nephew?" Mo Chenga didn't expect Li Yang would remember him as soon as she said his name. She was pleasantly surprised. "Do you really know him?" Li Yang shook his head. "Senior Martial Brother Yi is an elite disciple among elite disciples. We're just deacons of the steward's hall and we often run errands outside. How could we know him? We've only seen him before." "Oh, then do you know his situation? Did he come back from his experiential learning?" Wu Da took over the conversation and said with a smile, "Speaking of this, it's also interesting." Mo Chenga was stunned. "What happened?" Li Yang rushed to say, "Senior Martial Brother Yi disappeared for more than 10 years and there was no news about him. Unexpectedly, one year, news suddenly came from Kuanzhong City that an individual cultivator named Wanderer Baiyu was killed by 2 foundation-building cultivators. After that, our branch in Kuanzhong City received news from Senior Martial Brother Yi." "Wanderer Baiyu?" Mo Chenga and Qin Shi exchanged glances. Both of them had astonishment in their eyes. Seeing that Mo Chenga was confused, Qin Shi said, "Wanderer Baiyu is also a member of the Individual Cultivators Alliance in Kuanzhong City. He's more than 400 years old and has a youthful appearance. Reportedly, he specializes in dual cultivation. I once guessed that the person Old Tong said he wanted you to exchange heavenly aromatic beans for chalcedony was Wanderer Baiyu." "Correct." Li Yang continued, "Grandmaster Shoujing is really experienced and knowledgeable. Wanderer Baiyu is an individual cultivator in the core formation realm from Kuanzhong City. According to the senior martial brothers I met, he's obviously an old man, but he looks like a youngster. Moreover, he's fastidious like a woman. His reputation isn't very good. Many people say he uses the plucking technique to maintain his youth." Mo Chenga nodded. "What happened to Jinji in the end?" Wu Da continued, "Speaking of which, Senior Martial Brother Yi was really unlucky. When he traveled to Kuanzhong City, he accidentally saved a woman. As it turned out, that woman was the human furnace that Wanderer Baiyu fancied, so he captured her as well. Fortunately, due to Senior Martial Brother Ye's identity, Wanderer Baiyu didn't dare to kill him. In order to protect that woman, the 2 of them were imprisoned by Wanderer Baiyu for more than 10 years. After listening to the whole story, Mo Chenga was shocked at first, then she became furious. "This Wanderer Baiyu. How dare he? He actually dared to imprison a disciple of Shenqing school." "Who said he didn't?" "Later on, I don't know what method Senior Martial Brother Yi used, but he actually killed Wanderer Baiyu, a realm above him, and only then did he escape." Li Yang shook his head and said, "According to the Senior Martial Brothers in Kuanzhong City's branch, when Senior Martial Brother Yi and that woman escaped, both of them were tortured beyond recognition. What happened next?" Qin Shi frowned and asked, "Wanderer Baiyu imprisoned a disciple of Shenqing school. Did the school deal with him?" "Of course." Knowing this Grandmaster Shoujing only had one inner disciple, Li Yang hastily said, "As soon as Senior Martial Brother Yi returned to Mount Taikang, the whole school was shocked. Grandmaster Jingha personally gave the order and almost massacred the Individual Cultivators Alliance in Kuanzhong City. At that time, this matter shook Kunwu, and the Individual Cultivators Alliance was exterminated overnight. Later, Grandmaster Jingha calmed down and agreed to let the irrelevant people go. Now, the Individual Cultivators Alliance in Kuanzhong City has already been reorganized. Mo Chenga and Qin Shi finally felt their anger dissipate. If Wanderer Baiyu was still alive, the 2 of them would have immediately killed their way to Kuanzhong City. Jinji was their only disciple, but he was almost tortured to death by someone else. Just thinking about it made Mo Chenga and Qin Shi furious. Since Wanderer Baiyu cultivated the art of plucking and was a member of the Individual Cultivators Alliance, he was most likely the old friend Tong Tianyun mentioned. She and Tong Tianyun made an agreement to obtain heavenly aromatic beans from Demonic Mountain in exchange for 1,000-year-old chalcedony. If she met Wanderer Baiyu before that, Jinji probably wouldn't have suffered so much. Fortunately, Jinji escaped. Otherwise, she really would have regretted it for the rest of her life. Chapter 316. Worried about the two foundation-building disciples, Qin Shi and Mo Tiange spent 7 days to reach Xianqing School. As soon as they approached Mount Taikang, Mo Tiange saw several nascent Soul Lord Taoists and dozens of core formation masters in the air from a distance. She looked at Qin Shi suspiciously. What's going on? Qin Shi didn't understand what was going on either, but Wu Da and Li Yang answered with a smile, of course, to welcome Grandmaster Shoujing. Both of them were stunned. Several nascent Soul Lord Taoists and dozens of core formation cultivators actually came to welcome a nascent soul cultivator. The leader was even the head Grand Supreme Elder, Lord Taoist Jinyang. This was too grand. Even when Master returned to the mountain, he didn't have this kind of extravagance. While they were in a daze, Lord Taoist Jinyang led a huge crowd to welcome them and greeted them with a smile from afar. Shoujing, you're back. Qin Shi regained his composure and respectfully saluted Lord Taoist Jinyang. Martial Uncle Jinyang. Then he saluted the several nascent Soul Lord Taoists. Martial Uncles. Lord Taoist Jinyang chuckled. No need, no need. Today is the last time you'll call me Martial Uncle. From now on you'll have to call me Senior Brother or Senior Sister. Qin Shi smiled and didn't stand on ceremony. Since he had formed his nascent soul, he was naturally the Grand Supreme Elder and Lord Taoist Shoujing from now on, so he naturally had to change the way he addressed him. After he finished saluting, the core formation cultivators also saluted him. Greetings, Martial Uncle Shoujing. Dozens of core formation cultivators saluted him at the same time. Mo Tiange was shocked by the scene in front of her. Not long ago she had to call these people Martial Uncles, but in the blink of an eye, they had to call Qin Shi Martial Uncle. Although they didn't have to call her Martial Uncle, she and Qin Shi were husband and wife, so they still regarded her as an elder. Of course, the fact that she and Qin Shi had become dual cultivation partners wouldn't be made public until she reported it to Master. Qin Shi was calm. He still smiled and said to these people, no need to be so polite. Then he turned to Lord Taoist Jinyang. Martial Uncle Jinyang, I haven't heard from you for 10 years, so I've made you worry about me. I'm really ashamed. Lord Taoist Jinyang said with a smile. What shame? For the past 10 years, you were trapped in a dangerous place like Demonic Mountain. Not only did you manage to escape in the end, but you also formed your nascent soul and greatly raised the prestige of Xianqing School. Welcoming you today is what we ought to do. Qin Shi was speechless. He'd always been low-key and wasn't good at interacting with people. Lord Taoist Jinyang being so cautious about this matter made him feel uneasy even though he thought highly of him. Lord Taoist Miaoi noticed his uneasiness, so she immediately said to Lord Taoist Jinyang with a smile, Senior Martial Brother Jinyang, Shoujing just came back, so I'm afraid he's tired. Why don't you let him rest first? We can talk about this later. All right. Lord Taoist Jinyang patted his head and said with a smile, Shoujing, you two can go back to Clear Spring Peak to rest and see your master. Junior Martial Brother Jinghe will definitely be very happy to see you two back. Lord Taoist Jinyang had always been steady, but today he was so happy that he almost fainted. Seeing this, Mo Tiange was secretly amused. In fact, the point wasn't that Qin Shi formed his nascent soul, but that he formed his nascent soul at the right time. Although Xianqing School's nascent soul cultivators weren't as good as Tiandao sects, they were young and had great potential. However, they were always suppressed by Tiandao sect in terms of numbers and strength. Coincidentally, the last time Demonic Mountain opened, Tiandao sect lost a nascent soul cultivator and its reputation declined. Qin Shi forming his nascent soul at this time not only greatly raised the prestige of Xianqing School, but also made the number of nascent soul cultivators in Xianqing School finally catch up with Tiandao sect. In that case, everyone would calculate that in another 100 or 200 years, Tiandao sect would lose 1 or 2 nascent soul cultivators, and Xianqing School would fully deserve to be the number 1 sect in the Celestial Pole. The number 1 sect in the Celestial Pole wasn't just a title. The benefits it brought were obvious. First of all, it was attractive to cultivators. Many cultivators would come because of the reputation of the number 1 sect in the Celestial Pole, and they could choose the best disciples. With the best disciples, their development potential would be greater than that of other cultivation groups, and the sect would continue to prosper. As the head Grand Supreme Elder of Xianqing School, Lord Taoist Jinyang had lived for more than 1,000 years and struggled for the sect's affairs for several hundred years. Now that he was in charge and Xianqing School had a chance to become the number 1 sect in the Celestial Pole, how could he not be happy? Then he gave them a few words of encouragement. Even Wu Da and Li Yang, who followed them back, also benefited from the head Grand Supreme Elder's praise. They were so excited that they almost fainted. The two of them felt helpless. After a long time they finally escaped and returned to Clear Spring Peak. As soon as they arrived at Clear Spring Peak, several senior martial brothers and sisters welcomed them with their disciples. They spent some time chatting about some things before they were finally allowed to go to Shanqing Palace. Greetings to Grandmaster Shoujing, Martial Uncle Qingwei. Once they entered Shanqing Palace, a maid immediately came to greet them. Mo Qingge swept her gaze around. Lord Daoist Jinghe wasn't in the hall. Where's your Grandmaster? Jingxi asked. Mame bowed and answered on behalf of the maids, Grandmaster's in the closed-door meditation room. Lord Daoist Jinghe's cultivation level was extremely high, so he wasn't afraid of being disturbed when he cultivated, so he always sat in the hall and cultivated. But now he was in closed-door meditation room because he was seriously injured. Jingxi nodded. I see. You can go now. Yes. The maids respectfully saluted him again, then went to do their own things. Jingxi looked back at Mo Tiange. It seems Master's injuries are really serious. He's actually in the closed-door meditation room. Mo Tiange nodded silently. Ever since she entered the sect, she had never seen Lord Daoist Jinghe enter the closed-door meditation room. Even if he said he wanted to cultivate, he only laid a restriction in the hall. She had only heard of that closed-door meditation room, but she had never been there. Let's go and take a look first. I hope Master's fine. She sighed softly and led Mo Tiange out of the hall. After several turns, they finally stopped in front of an inconspicuous stone room. Upon seeing this stone room, Mo Tiange felt this was a real cultivation place for middle-stage nascent soul cultivators. There weren't any unnecessary decorations and there were only many restrictions. Unfortunately, Lord Daoist Jinghe had very few opportunities to use it. Stopping in front of the stone room, she sighed again and said, The last time Master entered the closed-door meditation room was when I just entered the sect. At that time, Master hadn't reached the peak of the middle stage of the nascent soul realm, so he often entered closed-door meditation room. Later, when he reached the peak of the middle stage of the nascent soul realm, he didn't have any fated chances, so he cultivated less and tried to break through his mental state. I didn't expect this would happen the next time he used the closed-door meditation room. He put his palms together, quickly made a set of hand seals, and hit the door of the stone room. The stone room moved slightly. After a while, a voice came from inside. Is it Shi'er? The voice sounded a little old. Mo Tiange and Qingxi looked at each other and saw shock in each other's eyes. Qingxi answered, Yes, Master. Tiange and I are back. After a while, the door to the stone room slowly opened with a loud bang. As the stone door moved, they saw Lord Daoist Jinghe sitting on the stone bed inside the stone room. He was still wearing a golden crown and luxurious clothes, and he still looked noble, but his black hair had turned white. Master. The two of them called out in unison. They walked forward tremblingly, knelt in front of the stone bed, and looked up at Lord Daoist Jinghe. Not only had his hair turned white, but his eyebrows and beard had also lost their color. There were fine wrinkles at the corners of his eyes and forehead, and the muscles at the corners of his mouth had softened. Lord Daoist Jinghe originally looked like he was in his 30s or 40s, but now he looked like he was in his 50s. What kind of injury could have caused him to age so much in 10 years? Master, why did you? Mo Tiange couldn't finish her words. Although this master always annoyed her, she knew he was good to her. In this life, except for her dead mother and second uncle, no one else loved her as much as he did. Seeing her master like this, she felt as if someone was clutching her heart. Lord Daoist Jinghe looked up and swept his gaze over the two disciples kneeling in front of him. He smiled slightly. Don't worry, I won't die. After saying that, his gaze fell on Qingxi and he showed a gratified smile. Are you finally formed your nascent soul? Qingxi looked up, grasped Lord Daoist Jinghe's hand tightly and said hoarsely, Master, how are your injuries? If you have any methods or medicinal pills you need, just tell us. We'll definitely do it for you. Right. Mo Tiange remembered if her master's injuries could be cured with medicinal pills, she didn't lack them at all. Master, tell me. No matter what kind of medicinal pills I need, it's fine as long as there's hope. Alas. Lord Daoist Jinghe sighed softly and stroked her head as if she was still a child. You don't have to be like this. If you need medicinal pills, are you afraid your martial uncle Xinjiang won't get them for me? Although Master is seriously injured, he's fine for the time being. We'll talk about this later. By the way, what do you want to tell Master? Upon hearing this, Qinshi's eyes reddened. He took Emo Chenga's hand and said cautiously, Master, Chenga and I were trapped on Demonic Mountain for the past 10 years. I formed my nascent soul and became husband and wife with Chenga, so I didn't report it to Master at that time. I hope Master can forgive me. Lord Daoist Jinghe smiled. It was a gentle and kind smile that had never been seen before. He looked at his two most beloved disciples and said softly, I'm more than happy that you two became husband and wife. You don't have to apologize. He looked at Qinshi and asked, since you've formed your nascent soul and performed dual cultivation with Chenga, the knot in your heart must have been resolved and the demon barrier must have disappeared, right? Qinshi said in a low voice, yes. Disciple didn't listen to Master's advice before and made Master worry. Lord Daoist Jinghe nodded with a smile. It's good that you understand. He then turned to Emo Chenga. Chenga, what about you? Do you have any worries or obsessions in your heart now? No, Emo Chenga answered softly. Emo Chenga answered softly, rest assured, Master. Senior Martial Brother and I have been honest with each other. Those misunderstandings and obsessions no longer exist. That's good. Lord Daoist Jinghe paused for a while and said, You disappeared for 10 years but Master always believed you'd come back. Today you finally didn't let me down. Both Emo Chenga and Qinshi felt their hearts tremble. Lord Daoist Jinghe sighed again. You too. Forget it. It's good that you're back. Since you've become husband and wife, you should cultivate well. Master will continue his closed-door meditation. If you have nothing to do, you don't have to disturb me. Master still wants to recover from his injuries and advance to the late stage of the nascent soul realm. Chapter 317. When they came out of Lord Daoist Jinghe's closed-door meditation room, both Emo Chenga and Qinshi were in a heavy mood. After walking a bit further, they stopped by the railing at the same time. Chenga? Qinshi called out. He wanted to say something but hesitated. Emo Chenga smiled and sighed. She hugged his waist and said softly, I know what you want to say. Don't worry. If there's anything in the virtual sky world that Master can use, I won't be stingy. Qinshi was moved when he heard what she said. He said gratefully, Thank you for saying that. What are you thanking me for? Emo Chenga chuckled. He's your master and also my master. In this world, no one treats me better than him except you. Qinshi didn't say anything and just hugged her tightly. He knew that although she had the indifference and decisiveness a cultivator should have, she was also a person who valued relationships. She would always remember who treated her well, and if there was a chance in the future, she would pay them back double. They both knew their master's injury was very serious, but it wasn't like there was no way. With the spiritual plants in the virtual sky world and Qinshi's knowledge of many pill recipes, Martial Uncle Xinjiang might not have seen all of those pills. Later, let's study what medicinal pills can be used to heal Master, Emo Chenga said softly. And Qinshi answered. This was the only thing they could do for their master right now. In their divine senses, a foundation-building cultivator was walking towards them, but they didn't move. There were only maids in Shangqing Palace, and these maids didn't dare to disturb them. However, when the man saw them, he called out, Auntie. Master. The voice sounded very surprised. Hearing this voice, the two of them hurriedly separated. They saw Yi Jinji standing not far away, looking at them with tears almost falling from his eyes. Jinji. Yi Jinji wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes and murmured, You're finally back. I knew you'd definitely come back. Emo Chenga recalled what Wu Da and Liang said happened to him all these years. Seeing his haggard face, she felt sorry for him. Although Jinji wasn't her disciple, she brought him up. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say he was her son. Jinji, why did you lose so much weight? She grasped Yi Jinji's pulse, then probed his body with her true aura. However, she discovered that he wasn't injured at all. Furthermore, the spiritual aura inside his body was stable. He was already in the middle stage of the foundation-building realm. Upon hearing her question, Yi Jinji unexpectedly lowered his head and started to cry. Back then, when he lacked experience and his character was a bit weak, he never cried. Today, however, Emo Chenga and Qinshi were startled. The first thing Emo Chenga thought about was the imprisonment Wu Da and Liang mentioned. During those 10-odd years, did he suffer inhumane torture? Seeing them all of a sudden was why he felt so wronged? Qinshi sighed and asked, What made you so sad? Yi Jinji wiped away his tears, then looked up and said, Master Auntie, please save Linbua. Please help me save Linbua. Mo Chenga and Qin Shi looked at each other. Both of them were confused. Linbua. Then the two of them remembered that Yi Jinji was trapped by Master Taoist Baiyu precisely because of a woman. Could it be this Linbua? Thinking up to this point, the two of them pondered inwardly. Could it be that Jinji has some sort of relationship with this woman? Yi Jinji said, Linbua, come with me. I'll tell you slowly. As he led them, Yi Jinji first asked them if they had been all right in the past 10 years. When he learned that they had become husband and wife, he was quite happy. Presumably he had figured it out in the past few years. Then he talked about his experiences in the past few years, which were not different from what Wu Da and Liang said. He was indeed imprisoned by Wanderer Baiyu. Before he left, Qin Shi was worried and gave him several magic talismans to protect himself. During those 10-odd years, Yi Jinji pretended to be incompetent and suffered a lot to numb Wanderer Baiyu. In the end, when Wanderer Baiyu was unprepared, he killed him with magic talismans. After listening to this, Mo Chenga and Qin Shi were quite surprised. Although they both loved Yi Jinji, they always thought he was a little weak and couldn't be a great person. They didn't expect him to have such scheming and perseverance when he was in danger. It seemed it was the right decision to let him go out to gain experience. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to stimulate his potential. The Linbua he mentioned was called Shui Linbua. She was originally from the Eastern Sea. The Eastern Sea had been in chaos for several decades. She was lucky and accidentally found a way to cross Demonic Mountain and come to Kunwu. Her aptitude wasn't good, so she couldn't enter those cultivation sections. As a woman, she struggled to cultivate in Kunwu. Later, she unexpectedly had a fated chance and advanced to the foundation-building realm. She was a foundation-building female cultivator without a backer. Although her aptitude wasn't good, she was a human furnace desired by many cultivators. Wanderer Baiyu took a fancy to her just like that in Kuanzhong City. Coincidentally, on the day Wanderer Baiyu tried to capture her, Yi Jinji passed by and was mistakenly thought to be Shui Linbua's accomplice, so he was captured together with her. Later, Wanderer Baiyu discovered Yi Jinji's identity. Although he knew he had captured the wrong person, he didn't dare to let Yi Jinji go. He was worried that Yi Jinji would hold a grudge against him, but he also didn't dare to kill him. He was worried that Yi Jinji might have left something like a natal lamp behind. If Yi Jinji was tracked down, Wanderer Baiyu wouldn't have a good ending. Therefore, he imprisoned Yi Jinji in a place and trapped him with layers of restrictions to prevent others from tracking him. Shui Linbua used some kind of technique to make Wanderer Baiyu mistakenly think she had lost her primordial yin, so she was also imprisoned. She was a loyal person. Seeing that she had implicated Yi Jinji, she protected him all these years, saving him a lot of suffering. Because of this, she suffered more than Yi Jinji. When she escaped, her injuries were already too serious to heal. Unfortunately, after Yi Jinji brought her back, Mo Chenga and Qin Shi weren't there. Lord Taoist Jinghe was seriously injured and in closed-door meditation, so he didn't have time to take care of himself. Although Shui Linbua's life was saved for the time being, no one could cure her injuries. After hearing this, Mo Chenga and Qin Shi looked at each other. Both of them had a plan in their minds. Since the two of them went through trials and tribulations together, they must have developed feelings for each other, which was why Jinji was so excited. Mo Chenga sighed inwardly. It turned out Jinji had also grown up and had a sweetheart. Jinji, Mo Chenga asked, don't you have the healing medicinal pills Auntie gave you? She didn't get better after taking them. Yi Jinji shook his head dejectedly. After we were caught, my Qingkuan bag was searched. Fortunately, I was careful and secretly hid some things. Later I killed Wanderer Baiyu, but I didn't get them back. I didn't even get the magic tools Master and Auntie gave me. It's fine. Qin Shi comforted him. Master can refine more magic tools for you. Yi Jinji smiled and whispered, thank you, Master. After a pause, he continued, later I finally got in touch with the senior martial brothers of the branch in Kuanzhong City, and they sent me and Linbua back. When Grandmaster heard about it, he specially summoned Martial Uncle Mingjin. Martial Uncle Mingjin went to Kuanzhong City and destroyed the individual cultivators' alliance. Mingjin was Lord Taoist Jinghe's third disciple and one of his first 3 disciples. He had been in the core formation realm for more than 200 years and was now in the late stage of the core formation realm. He was skilled and powerful. Although the individual cultivators' alliance also had several core formation cultivators, the strongest ones, Taoist Kumu and Tong Tianyun, died on Demonic Mountain, and Wanderer Baiyu was killed by Yi Jinji. The remaining ones were definitely not Mingjin's match. However, although Lord Taoist Jinghe liked to kill, he rarely implicated others. Presumably, Jinji was tortured too miserably, which made him so angry. Grandmaster also gave Linbua medicinal pills, but Linbua's injuries were too serious, so he could only save her life. I know Grandmaster is also seriously injured now, so I don't dare to disturb him again. But Martial Uncle Mingjin and Grandmaster Xianin can't do anything about Linbua's injuries, so I don't know what to do. As they talked, they walked to the door of Mingxin residence. When Mo Chenga saw Jinji opening the restriction, she asked, "Do you live here now?" Yi Jinji answered, "Grandmaster took pity on Linbua and liked her unyielding character, so he let her stay. He said Mingxin residence has calm spiritual aura and is suitable for healing, so he let her live here. In order to take care of Linbua, I usually live here." His expression was sad but calm, and his smiling baby face also looked a bit more stable, which made Mo Chenga feel very gratified. "You've grown up, Jinji." Yi Jinji smiled. "Andy, I'm almost 80 years old. I should have grown up long ago." Mo Chenga also smiled. Jinji was much taller than her, and now he looked more mature than her. He was indeed no longer the child who always relied on her. Nothing in Mingxin residence had changed. When Mo Chenga moved away, she only took daily necessities with her. Now, even the furnishings hadn't changed. Yi Jinji led them all the way to the lounge, opened the restriction and called softly, "Linbua?" Mo Chenga and Qin followed him inside. In the small lounge, the originally cold jade bed was now covered with a layer of soft fur. A haggard young woman sat cross-legged on the bed with her eyes closed, seemingly healing her injuries. As soon as Mo Chenga saw her expression, she knew her dantian and meridians were injured. Then, she saw that the spiritual aura all over her body was faintly discernible and often scattered. She speculated that her meridians were riddled with holes and couldn't retain spiritual aura at all. She stepped forward, gently took the woman's hand and carefully probed her spiritual aura. Sure enough, her speculation was confirmed. If she hadn't seen it with her own eyes, she wouldn't have believed that a cultivator's meridians were injured to this extent, and her dantian was also damaged. If it weren't for the medicinal power settling in her dantian, she would have died long ago. "Annie, how is it?" Yi Jinji was a little anxious, but he was afraid of disturbing Shui Linbua, so he asked softly. Mo Chenga sighed and looked at Qin Shi. "It's very serious. No wonder senior martial brother Mingjin and martial uncle Xianin couldn't do anything about it." Upon hearing that, Qin Shi also stepped forward to probe the woman's meridians and also frowned. Looking at their expressions, Yi Jinji couldn't care about anything else and begged, "Auntie Master, please think of a way, think of a way." "Don't worry," Mo Chenga said, "as long as there's a way, I'll definitely help you, but you have to cheer up." Upon hearing her comfort, Yi Jinji showed a determined expression. "Auntie, rest assured. No matter what happens in the end, I won't give up hope." Mo Chenga smiled and nodded. Since Jinji was begging her, she would certainly try her best. Moreover, this woman came from the Eastern Sea, so she might be related to Bichuan court. This could also be considered a bit of a connection with her. Chapter 318. At this time, Shui Linbua finally opened her eyes. The first person she saw was Yi Jinji, and she asked softly, "Why are you here again? Aren't you going to cultivate?" There was a hint of reproach in her tone, which reminded Mo Chenga that she used to urge Yi Jinji to cultivate like this, and she couldn't help but smile. Yi Jinji stepped forward, sat down beside her and said softly, "Linbua, my aunt and master finally came back safely. Come and see them." Shui Linbua seemed to notice that there was someone else in the room. Even though Mo Chenga and Qin Shi had restrained their auras, they were, after all, a core formation cultivator and a nascent soul cultivator. She didn't feel anything at all, so her divine sense must have been seriously injured to be so slow. She raised her head curiously, glanced at Qin Shi, and then fixed her eyes on Mo Chenga's face. This made Mo Chenga feel interested. Any woman, whether mortal or cultivator, would look at Qin Shi's face when they saw the two of them. She didn't expect this woman to just glance at him and then stare at her face. Mo Chenga guessed that if this woman didn't have an extremely good state of mind and didn't care about beauty or ugliness, then she must be very scheming. But the next moment, Shui Linbua's reaction overturned her guess. Shui Linbua's skinny, bloodless face was slightly flushed, and her expression gradually became excited. She didn't even care about etiquette and shouted at Mo Chenga, "Fairy, are you a fairy?" Not only were Mo Chenga and Qin Shi stunned, but even Yi Jinji was stunned. He asked her strangely, "What fairy?" "Linbua, what did you say?" Shui Linbua stared at Mo Chenga expectantly and said, 58 years ago on the coast of the East Sea, an end of the Shui family. Fairy, do you still remember? Mo Chinga was stunned, and the image of a little girl with a sallow face and hopeful eyes gradually emerged in her mind. 58 years ago on the coast of the East Sea, she gave a little girl an ordinary cultivation technique and let her embark on the path to immortality. It's you? You're really a fairy? Shui Linbo cried tears of joy and then struggled to get up and kneel. Fairy, thank you for giving me the book. If it weren't for you there would be no Shui Linbo today. Get up first. Mo Chinga gently raised her hand, and an invisible spiritual aura pushed Shui Linbo back to the bed. He looked at Shui Linbo in disbelief and then at Mo Chinga. Linbo, is my aunt the fairy who gave you the cultivation technique? Shui Linbo nodded and said happily, so this fairy is your aunt? No wonder I always felt that Xianqing School's clothes were very similar to fairies. At that time she was only 8 years old, so she could only vaguely remember many things. She could only roughly remember Mo Chinga's appearance. If it wasn't for the fact that Mo Chinga's appearance hadn't changed all these years and her clothes were still the same as before, she probably wouldn't have recognized her. Mo Chinga originally thought that since this female cultivator came from the Eastern Sea, they might have some kind of relationship, but she never expected that their relationship would be so deep. Back then it was just something he did casually, but who would have thought that it would create a foundation-building female cultivator today? Moreover, she even had a close relationship with Jinji. It could be seen that there were indeed coincidences in this world. Shui Linbo didn't mention such a trivial matter back then, so Qinshi also didn't know. Seeing their expressions he asked Mo Chinga, what's wrong? Is she your old friend? Mo Chinga nodded and smiled. I also didn't expect it to be so coincidental. Back then I was ordered by my master to travel and arrived at the coast of Donglin. This child has spiritual roots. Back then her parents begged me so I gave her a cultivation technique. I really didn't expect her to cultivate to this level. I see. Qinshi nodded. Seeing that Shui Linbo didn't know how to address Qinshi, Yijinji introduced, Linbo, this is my master, Master Taoist Shoujing. Oh no, my master has advanced to the nascent soul realm. He's now Lord Taoist Shoujing. Shui Linbo was startled and immediately became nervous. She had long known that Yijinji's identity was extraordinary. Her aunt and master were both core formation cultivators, and they were elders of a big cultivation group like Xianqing School. But she didn't expect Qinshi to advance to the nascent soul realm so soon. She was originally just an ordinary individual cultivator and rarely saw core formation cultivators. It was only after she came back with Yijinji that she saw nascent soul cultivators. Now that she heard the person standing in front of her was a nascent soul cultivator, she was so nervous that she didn't know how to salute. In the end, Qinshi smiled and said, you don't have to be nervous. Since you're Jinji's. He paused. There were some things Jinji didn't say and it wasn't good for him to say them clearly, so he said vaguely, Grandmaster has allowed you to stay, so you're a disciple of our Clear Spring Peak. Just call me as you should. Yes. Shui Linbo calmed down, saluted and said respectfully, greetings to Grandmaster Shoujing. After the salute, Mo Chinga looked at Qinshi. The two of them had been companions in the virtual sky world for 10 years, and they had long understood many things. Qinshi understood what she meant, so he said with a smile, you decide. Mo Chinga also smiled, took out a jade bottle from her robe and gave it to Yijinji. Jinji will find a way to treat Linbo's injury. Before that, give her 1 pill every 3 days. After taking it, use your spiritual aura to help her heal for 4 hours. Yes, Auntie. Mo Chinga smiled and said to them, your master and I just came back and we still have other things to arrange, so we'll go back first. You can heal and cultivate as usual. Yes, Yijinji said hurriedly, Auntie, I'll see you out. Mo Chinga raised her hand to stop him. No need. Just watch over Linbo. She nodded at Shui Linbo with a smile, then left with Qinshi. After leaving Xianqing Palace, the two of them had their own thoughts. They walked at the same time, one going east and the other going south. After walking about 10 steps, they realized that the other party didn't go with them, so they stopped and turned around, stunned. Why are you going that way? After asking at the same time, they were stunned again, remembering that their caves weren't in the same place. The two of them laughed at each other, sighed and walked together. What should we do? Qinshi asked, should we go to your cave or mine first? Mo Chinga said, let's go back to our respective caves. We haven't been back for a long time, so we have to deal with things first. We'll contact each other when we're done. Qinshi thought about it and nodded. Okay. Remember to send me a summoning talisman. Mo Chinga nodded, and the two of them separated and went back to their caves. Since they were married, they naturally had to live together in the future. The two of them had also discussed this matter. She said that his cave looked inconspicuous, but it was actually located on a relatively large spiritual eye in the spirit vein of Clear Spring Peak. He also thought of many ways to enhance the spiritual aura there, and now it was not inferior to Shanqing palaces. And the most important thing was that it was very secluded and there were few idle people around, which suited their quiet personality. Mo Chinga's current cave was big enough and the spiritual aura was also good, but because it was too big, there would be a lot of people to take care of it. Moreover, the two of them probably wouldn't accept many disciples, so it was better to give it to others and make the best use of it. Mo Chinga thought for a long time and agreed. Her current cave was used by Lord Taoist Shenin before he formed his nascent soul. She only lived there for 2 years, so there weren't many things, so it was convenient to move. But no matter how convenient it was, she couldn't move immediately. She still had to go back and deal with some chores. Fortunately, Xianqing School Steward's Hall was very capable. She had been gone for 10 years, but the cave was still in good condition. The things that needed to be done weren't left behind at all, and the spirit stones used were all deducted from her offerings. She hadn't received offerings for 10 years, but now she received a huge sum of money all of a sudden. When she finished her business and told the steward's hall that she wanted to move to another cave, Qianxi's summoning talisman arrived. Upon hearing that she wanted to move to Qianxi's cave, the steward of the steward's hall was so surprised that his jaw almost dropped. Now that he saw Mo Chinga smiling after receiving the summoning talisman, his imagination began to run wild. Mo Chinga was about to reply when she sensed a nascent soul cultivator approaching. Then Qianxi landed on a flying cloud and walked in. She was surprised. Why did he come? She just received the summoning talisman. Qianxi smiled. I just remembered that I was going to the spiritual beast pavilion to pick up the spiritual beast I was fostering, so I came out. After answering, Mo Chinga remembered that the steward of the steward's hall was still there, so she said to that person, "All right, I'll leave everything to you. Go do it." Yes. That person's gaze shifted back and forth between her and Qianxi. He bowed to Qianxi and was about to leave, but he suddenly remembered that he was no longer a core formation cultivator, so he hurriedly bowed to him and left to handle the matter. Mo Chinga stared at the steward's back and sighed. I guess he must be thinking, this martial uncle Qingwei seems to be well behaved, but I didn't expect her to hook up with Grandmaster Shoujing. She really doesn't show her true colors. Qianxi couldn't help but laugh when he said the last sentence in a very funny tone. Seeing him laughing, Mo Chinga couldn't help but laugh as well. She asked, "Are you done with your business?" Qianxi sat down next to her and put his arm around her waist out of habit. He answered, "What can happen to my small cave? I just need to ask him a few questions." Mo Chinga nodded. That's true. A small cave has its own benefits. She paused for a moment, then asked, "What do you think about Master's matter?" This question made Qianxi's smile disappear. He said, "This matter can't be rushed. We still have to go see Master in 2 days. How about this? It's not convenient to tell him about the virtual sky world, but we can show Master a few kinds of medicinal pills first and tell him we found a lot of spiritual plants on Demonic Mountain. In this way, Master will believe we have the ability to help him, and then he'll tell us if there are medicinal pills that can treat his injury." Mo Chinga agreed. What about Shui Linbua? This question stumped Qianxi. To be honest, I've never seen anyone with such a serious injury, and I don't know what to do. There are several medical cultivators in our sect who may know more about injuries. Why don't we ask them? Oh right. His reminder reminded Mo Chinga of senior martial brother Kuangzhu and his family in Seoul's Retreat Peak. She'd better find time to ask them. These 2 things can't be rushed. Right now there's one thing I have to discuss with you. And? Qianxi looked at her and said helplessly, "My soul formation is of special significance to the sect, so Martial Uncle Xinjiang sent a message saying that we'll hold a soul formation ceremony. In addition, although we've made a blood oath and become husband and wife, we should also hold a dual cultivation ceremony." Don't? Mo Chinga immediately refused. Then, seeing his puzzled look, she lowered her head and explained, "You can decide the soul formation ceremony, but can we forget about the dual cultivation ceremony? I really don't like that." Qianxi thought for a moment, then nodded. "I know what you mean. I also don't like that kind of atmosphere. How about this? I'll just tell Martial Uncle Xinjiang and make an announcement at the soul formation ceremony." Mo Chenga accepted this idea, so she didn't say anything. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.